Chapter 159, Olive Branch. AN Holiday Release, enjoy the extra chapters. Thomas POV. Forks High spit us back out into the parking lot like it always did, bells, bodies, slamming locker doors, and the sharp little roar of teenage freedom. Well, the freedom we had until the larger cage of adulthood closed in around us. Edward and Bella were gone before I even got my key into my passenger door to unlock it for Edythe. Alice had been picked up by Jasper today, so I was clear to drive home without her commenting on my driving. I loved the girl, but she could rarely follow one thought through to the next without being distracted by something else. I walked around the truck to the driver's side and got in. Edythe had hit the auto unlock for me. As I turned the ignition and the truck rumbled to life. Edythe rested her hand on the center console, close enough to mine that the contact was inevitable without being clingy. I pulled out into traffic and headed for home, silently brooding without realizing I was. "You're thinking again," she said. "I'm always thinking," I answered, throwing her a smile. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "About them." "The pack," I admitted. "You planted the seed. Now it's taking root." "I suggested," she corrected, voice mild. "That's what you call it when you want me to do a thing without pushing me into it." She tilted her head slightly, like she might argue, then decided not to. "Will you call Sam?" "Yeah," I said. "Tonight." The drive home was short, wet road quiet, the kind of normal that didn't match anything we actually were. But my mind kept circling the same point, over and over, like a tongue on a sore tooth. Training the wolves meant trust. Trust meant truth. And truth meant deciding how much I was willing to put in front of people who were raised to see the Cullens as monsters. Worst case scenario, what I teach them could one day harm my soon-to-be vampire family. When we got home, Edythe peeled off towards the living room as I went to the kitchen, looking for some fruit to snack on. Jasper and I had been talking about getting back to my workouts in my normal form again to see if any increased strength in my base form transferred to my enhanced forms. Even in my fully human form I was supernaturally strong but nowhere near as strong as a vampire. We figured Jasper could provide the resistance to make sure my body was getting a true workout and go from there. Partly it was an excuse to spend time with my friend like we had done before. At least that's what it was for me, and I suspected it was the same for him. Finally, when I couldn't procrastinate it further, I grabbed my phone and called Sam. It rang once. Twice. Then his voice came through, flat, controlled, and somehow still carrying the weight of being responsible for too many people at too young an age. "Thomas." "Hey," I said, and forced my tone to stay casual. "You got a minute?" A beat. A faint shift in the background, wind? Footstep? Then, yeah. Talk. I leaned my hip against the counter, staring at the bruised skin of a banana like it was going to give me the right words. "I'm looking to set up a meeting," I said. "With the council." Silence. Not anger. Assessment. "The elders," Sam said finally, like he needed to hear it in his own words before he decided whether to bite. "Why?" "Because I'm not trying to do this sideways," I answered. "No sneaking around. No, hey, your teenagers want to spar, let's do it behind everyone's back and hope nobody takes it as an insult." Sam exhaled slowly. "And what is this, exactly?" "Training," I said. "Real training. Not just running patrol routes and hoping instincts cover the gaps. You've got wolves who can hit like trucks and move faster. But that's not enough to stop them from getting themselves killed the first time they try to fight something that thinks like a vampire." Sam didn't interrupt, which meant I'd hit a nerve he recognized. "I can train the pack at that level," I continued. "I can take hits without it turning into a treaty incident. And I can hit back hard enough that it actually teaches them something." "You're human," Sam said, skeptical and sharp. "How does that help us train for vampires?" "I'm human," I agreed. But I can make this form strong enough to match an average vampire. Another silence, heavier now. I could almost picture him staring out into the trees with his jaw tight, doing that internal math he always did, risk versus benefit, pride versus necessity. You said the council, he repeated. So, you want permission? I want consent, I corrected. From the people who are going to have to live with the consequences if the future goes bad. And I'm willing to answer questions while I'm there. About what I know. About what's out there. That finally got a sound out of him, half a scoff, half disbelief. You want to stand in front of the elders and offer them a Q&A about monsters. I want to stand in front of the elders and be honest, I said. Call it whatever you want. The line went quiet long enough that my grip tightened around the phone. Then Sam said, "You're not banned from the res." I know. And you know the Cullens are. I know, I said again, firmer this time. This isn't them. This is me. Another beat. Then, you planning to bring your fiancé anyway? The word landed oddly fiancé, like my life had shifted into a new lane and my brain hadn't updated the signage yet. No, I said. Edythe won't step foot over the line. She respects the treaty. Good, Sam replied, and I couldn't tell if he meant it as approval or as a warning. I rubbed my thumb across the edge of my phone case. Sam. I'm not trying to replace you. Or challenge you. Or make the pack look weak. You're trying to make them stronger, he said, and there was an edge to it, like he didn't entirely trust gifts. I'm trying to make sure none of you die because you weren't ready, I answered. That's it. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the pause of someone deciding whether to trust the shape of your intentions. Finally, Sam spoke. I'll talk to Billy. We'll see if they'll meet. Relief didn't hit like a wave. It hit like a loosening band around my chest that I hadn't realized was there. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet, Sam replied. The elders are going to ask a lot of awkward questions. And if you dance around it. I won't, I said, and surprised myself with how true it was. I'll answer what I can. And if they don't like the answers, then they say no, I said simply. And we go back to pretending the world is normal until it kills someone. But if that happens, my conscience is clear that I tried, and those deaths will be on them. Sam made a sound like he didn't love that sentence but couldn't argue it. I'll call you, he said. Probably tonight. Okay. And Thomas? Yeah. If Paul starts anything, I'm not stopping him. I snorted once. I wouldn't want you to. I can handle Paul. That got the faintest hint of amusement, just a breath of it. We'll see, Sam said, and then he hung up. I stared at the phone after the screen went dark, like the call might continue through sheer willpower. Behind me, the house was quiet. Not empty quiet, Edythe quiet. The kind where you could feel someone's presence even when you weren't looking. I didn't hear everything. Her voice came from the living room, calm and even. But I heard enough to know you did well. I turned my head toward the doorway. She was leaning against the frame, posture relaxed, eyes steady on my face. You could have heard everything, I said, not accusing. Just stating fact. I could have, she agreed. But you didn't ask me to. Something in my chest eased at that. Not because I'd doubted her, but because I'd needed the proof anyway. He's going to get me a meeting, I said. Edythe nodded once, like she'd already seen it as a possible future and had chosen to let me arrive at it on my own. And you're going to walk into it as yourself. I let out a slow breath. Yeah. Her gaze didn't waver. How much are you going to tell them? That was the question. The blade hidden in the softest cloth. I looked down at my hands, human hands, calloused and scarred and still not entirely believable as the same hands that could become claws. I'll tell them what matters for their safety, I said. And what matters for your trust? Edythe crossed the room without sound and stopped close enough that her presence pressed into my space, cool, steady, grounding. Her fingertips brushed my face, light as a feather. Just remember, she murmured, you don't have to bleed to earn respect. I met her eyes. I'm not planning to. A pause. And I'm not planning to show them the hybrid form, I added, because the thought had been chewing at me since I'd said the word truth to Sam. Not unless something forces it. Edythe's expression didn't change, but something subtle in her eyes softened, approval, maybe, or relief. That seems wise. Yeah, I said. Also, I don't want the elders fainting. Billy's already in a wheelchair. It feels rude. Her mouth twitched. You are impossible. You love it. I do, she admitted, like it was the simplest fact in the world. Then she kissed me, and I turned my mind to what was truly important and in front of me right now. Chapter 160, Straight. No sideways. Thomas POV. The rest of the evening passed normally, a new familiarity I was getting used to. As I ate, Edythe sat nearby with a book she borrowed from the new release section of the school library. The living room lights stayed low. Rain worried at the windows. Every so often, I glanced at my phone that sat there on the table like it was daring me to leave the room. I had just slipped into the kitchen to rinse my plate when it finally buzzed. Sam. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered before it could ring a fourth time. Hey. His voice came through clipped, controlled. The council will meet you. That landed like a weight and a relief at the same time. Okay. When? Tomorrow. After sundown. He paused. Elders Hall. 7. I asked, because schedules mattered even when the details didn't. 7, Sam confirmed. You show up alone. I know, I replied. No Cullens. No Edythe. Just me. A pause, long enough to be a warning without sounding like one. And you understand why? Well. I mean, there is the treaty for starters. I joked to lighten the mood. Sam exhaled through his nose. Apparently, I wasn't funny. Good. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of my phone case, a nervous tic I had apparently picked up. Like I said earlier, I'm not trying to do this sideways, Sam. No sneaking. No bruised egos. I want to speak to them straight. Then speak straight, he said. Because they're going to ask questions. I'm ready for that, I answered. As long as it's mutual. It'll be mutual, Sam said, like he wasn't promising comfort, just honesty. I'll see you there. See you, I said. The call ended. I stood there for a second with the phone still at my ear, letting it settle. It wasn't the location that mattered. It wasn't even the time. It was the fact that it was happening at all. Edythe was in the doorway when I turned, motionless in that way she had that made the whole room feel like it had a center. Tomorrow, she asked. Tomorrow, I confirmed. Elders Hall. 7. Her expression didn't shift into analysis. No worry lines, no strategic spiraling, just that calm attention she always had when something mattered. Good, she said simply. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. They're going to want answers. Her eyes stayed on mine. Then give them the ones that keep their people alive. I nodded, because there wasn't anything clever to say to that. Yeah, I murmured. That's the plan. Edythe stepped into the kitchen, not crowding me, just closing the distance enough that I could feel her presence like a steady hand at my back. She glanced at the phone still in my grip. They'll test you, she said. I know. And they'll try to decide if you're a liability. Also no, I said, then let out a slow breath. I'm just, not thrilled about walking into a room full of people who've spent their whole lives being told my fiancé is a monster, and I'm the guy who decided to marry her anyway. Edythe's expression didn't change, still calm, still controlled, but something softened in her eyes. Then don't walk in as the man who decided, she said quietly. Walk in as the man who is choosing. There's a difference. Her gaze held mine. You also have to keep in mind that in a way they are right. Vampires are their enemy, just not all of them. I huffed a short laugh. That's very you. It's very true, she corrected. I set the phone down on the counter and leaned back against it, staring at the dim reflection of the kitchen lights in the window. Rain slid down the glass in thin, restless lines. I can handle questions, I said. What I don't want is to turn this into a pride thing. Then don't make it one, she said, simple as that. I glanced at her. You make it sound easy. It isn't easy, she replied. It's just necessary. There it was again. That word that kept showing up lately like the universe was trying to tattoo it on my forehead. I reached out and took her hand, thumb brushing her knuckles. You're not coming. I know. Treaty. I'm not asking. I know you're not, she said. But you can still take me with you. I blinked. What, like, morally? She arched one perfect eyebrow. Like the part of you that doesn't enjoy violence unless it's useful. Like the part of you that wants to build instead of burn. I couldn't help it, I smiled. You're getting manipulative. I'm getting practical, she said, and then her mouth twitched. It's rubbing off. Great, I muttered. Next you'll be making spreadsheets. Edythe's eyes flicked toward the living room where her library book lay open. Alice would. Don't summon her, I warned. I would never, she said, far too innocent. We moved back into the living room after that. We pretended to watch TV as I held her in my arms on the couch. Mostly, we just existed in the same space until the hour got late enough that my body started doing what it always did, slowing down, dragging me toward sleep whether I wanted to think or not. When I finally lay down, Edythe stayed beside me like always, still, cool, present. I didn't have to look to know she was watching my face, tracking the way my thoughts settled. Try to sleep, she said softly. I am trying, I muttered. That was not trying, she said, like she could see my brain pacing in circles. I turned my head enough to find her eyes in the dark. If this goes bad. It won't, she said. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters, she replied. Then, quieter, and if it gets difficult, remember what you told Sam. Straight. No sideways. I exhaled. Okay. Her fingers brushed my hair back once, feather light, and I closed my eyes. The last thing I remember before sleep took me was the sound of rain and the steady, familiar certainty of her beside me. Break. Jasper showed up early. Which, honestly, was on brand for a vampire who treated time like it owed him interest. I was already awake, my body rarely let me sleep in, but I was still wiping sleep from my eyes when the soft knock came. Edythe was already at the door before I could move. She opened it and Jasper stepped in like he belonged here, which, at this point, he kind of did. Morning, Jasper said, calm as ever. Morning, I replied, rubbing my eyes. You ever think about taking up a hobby that doesn't involve tormenting me before breakfast? I have several hobbies, World of Warcraft, Eve, Guild Wars. You're just my current favorite, Jasper said, deadpan. Edythe's mouth twitched. Try not to break my floors. Jasper's eyes flicked to her, faint amusement. No promises. I heard that, I warned. He didn't even blink. Good. We headed for the gym Esme had built into the house, clean, functional, and just personal enough that it still felt surreal sometimes. Not because I hadn't thanked her. I had. repeatedly. It was just strange to have a space made for me by someone who didn't have to. Jasper rolled his shoulders once, like he was settling into a familiar rhythm. Same as last time. Yeah, I said, stepping up to the bar. The iron itself wasn't the point. It was just structure. A place to put my hands. A line to push against. I set my grip and lifted. Jasper's palms came down on the bar, light at first, then firm as he added pressure, controlled, measured, exactly what we'd agreed on. It felt like lifting a decision. When it hit where I started to feel the strain, I pushed up and he tried to keep the same pressure as I moved the bar. My muscles burned, not because the weight was too much, but because the balance demanded precision I didn't always want to give. In my head, I could brute force half my problems. In my body, that got you hurt. Steady, Jasper said. Yeah, I grunted through my teeth. Again. Again. The strain built until my arms trembled and my breath went loud. Not panic loud, work loud. That's it, Jasper murmured. Don't fight the resistance. Own it. I adjusted. Slowed. Controlled the movement instead of trying to win it. The bar rose. Jasper pressed. I held. Something in my body clicked into place, the way it did when training stopped being about strength and started being about control. Jasper eased the pressure and I racked the bar, chest heaving. I straightened, wiping sweat off my forehead. Okay, I said between breaths. That felt different. Jasper nodded once. It was cleaner. Meaning you didn't try to prove anything, he said. You just did the work. I stared at him for a second, then snorted. You're doing therapy again. Yes, Jasper said immediately. Edythe's voice drifted from the doorway. She hadn't come in, but she'd been there, silent, steady. He can't help himself. Jasper glanced at her. Neither can Thomas. Hey, I protested, then had to admit it was fair. Jasper stepped back, done with the session as abruptly as he always was. Eat. Hydrate. Don't waste energy on rehearsing conversations you haven't had yet. I gave him a look. Do you know how hard that is for me? Yes, Jasper said. That's why I said it. And then he was gone, quiet, controlled, leaving me standing in my own gym with my heartbeat still running hot. The day crawled after that. School happened. Conversations blurred. Teachers talked. Forks stayed forks. But everything in my head was focused on sundown. By the time the sky went slate gray and the rain started again, I'd showered, changed, and checked my phone too many times to pretend I wasn't nervous. Edythe didn't try to stop me from spiraling. She just anchored me. You don't have to perform, she reminded me as I grabbed my keys. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I'm not going to. I know, she said simply. Then, softer, come back to me. That hit harder than any warning. I turned, stepped in close, and rested my forehead against hers for a heartbeat, brief, careful, the way we did it when we didn't need witnesses. I will, I promised. My lips found hers, slow at first, then sure, and for a second the rest of the world stopped existing. Then I left. The drive to the reservation felt longer than it should have. Not because the road changed, just because my mind did. The trees seemed denser. The world quieter. Like everything was holding its breath. When I pulled up near the Elders' Hall, the building sat solid and dark against the wet evening, warm light behind the windows, the faint hint of wood smoke in the air. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. I parked, cut the engine, and sat there for one last second with my hands on the steering wheel. Straight. No sideways. I got out, shut the door, and started walking toward the entrance. Chapter 161, Elders' Hall. Thomas POV. The Elders' Hall wasn't a place I'd ever stepped into before. I'd driven past it, everyone in Forks did, sooner or later, but past wasn't the same as inside. Up close, it felt heavier than any building had a right to feel, as if the wood had absorbed generations of voices and decided to keep them. Warm light glowed behind the windows. The air smelled like cedar and smoke and damp wool drying somewhere out of sight. I rolled up the windows and shut off the truck, then sat there for a beat with my hands on the steering wheel, listening to my own breathing, gathering my thoughts for what was to come. When I opened the door and walked up the steps, the porch boards creaked under my weight, an ordinary sound that somehow made everything more real. The hall door opened before I could knock twice. Sam Muley stood there, face set in that careful neutrality he wore like armor. He didn't offer a smile, but he didn't block the doorway either. "You're on time," he said. "I'm trying to start this right," I answered, and stepped inside. The room was simple, a long table, a few chairs, old photographs on the walls, the quiet feeling of a place that wasn't built to impress anyone. It didn't need to. The authority in it wasn't decoration. 5 people waited at the head table. Billy Black sat at the center in his wheelchair, hands resting lightly on the arms as if he'd been born there with the same calm control. His eyes tracked me in a way that made it impossible to forget he'd been doing this a long time, watching people, weighing them, deciding what they were before they ever realized they were being judged. Beside him sat old Quill Atira, posture straight as a fence post, expression carved into something stern and old-fashioned. He looked at me like he remembered every mistake I'd ever made and considered reminding me of those failures a sacred duty. Sue Clearwater sat on Billy's other side, composed, steady, her presence quiet but unmistakable. The surprise of seeing her there hit me hard enough that my chest tightened. Leah's mom. That meant a lot of things I wasn't ready to untangle in this room, but one of them was simple: Leah wasn't invisible here. So long as she was an elder, then the past wouldn't repeat itself. At the far end Sam took his seat, an elder not by age, but by necessity, because leadership didn't care how young you were when it decided to claim you, and he led the pack. The last elder sat to Sue's other side, a man I didn't recognize. Sam introduced him as Terry Yindi. He was quiet-eyed, still as stone, watching me like he was measuring the distance between what I said and what I meant. Sam cleared his throat. "Thomas Raizel, this is the Elder Council," he announced. Billy didn't move much, but the room seemed to align around him anyway. "You asked for a meeting?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Thank you for hearing me." I reached for the chair across from them out of habit, then stopped myself. Quill's gaze sharpened like he'd been waiting for the slip. Billy lifted a hand before Quill could speak, calm as a closed door. He nodded once toward the chair. "Sit," Billy said. "We're not here for ceremony. We're here for clarity." I sat carefully, setting my hands on the tabletop where everyone could see them. Not because I thought they'd accuse me of anything. Because this was still a room built on old lessons, trust was earned in small, visible choices. Sue's attention stayed on my face. Not hostile. Just direct. "You're offering to help train the pack," she said. "Sam has given us a brief overview of your discussion." Sam's jaw tightened a fraction at the mention of his name, the reflex of a man who carried too many outcomes. But he didn't look surprised by where this was going. If anything, he looked like he'd already fought the first round of this argument before I ever walked in. Terry Yindi leaned forward slightly, elbows close, voice even. "Most of us see the value in it. Wolves are strong, but strength doesn't replace experience. And experience doesn't appear just because someone wants it." That was the first time the room openly tilted in my direction, and it took the edge off my nervousness in a way I hadn't expected. Billy nodded once, slow. "We've heard the stories of warriors who were brave enough to charge and not trained enough to live. Our graveyards are full of them, we won't pretend otherwise." Quill's mouth tightened, but he didn't contradict Billy. He just stared at me like agreement was a separate argument he intended to win later. Sue spoke again, steady as a heartbeat. If you can help them without causing another conflict, that matters. Sam finally shifted his weight, his voice low but clear. No one here thinks the pack is weak. They think the pack is young. That landed with a quiet finality. A leader naming the truth without letting it become an insult. Billy's eyes stayed on mine. So, tell us what you're proposing. I took a breath. Training that closes the gap between pack hunting and individual survival. Not to change who they are, wolves are wolves for a reason, but so that if someone gets isolated for even a few seconds, they don't die for it. Terry nodded faintly, like that was exactly the sentence he'd been waiting for. Sue's gaze didn't waver. You're talking about control drills. Yes, I said. Footwork. Timing. Not taking bait. Not charging in a straight line just because it feels good to hit something. Vampires count on anger making you predictable. Quill made a sound in the back of his throat. Not a scoff exactly, but close. You speak like you're one of us, he said, each word precise. Like you have the right. The temperature in the room didn't drop, but it shifted, attention tightening, waiting to see if this turned into a fight. I kept my voice level. I'm speaking like someone who spars against multiple vampires almost every morning. Someone who was shown, painfully I might add, that brute force and rushing in will kill me. Quill's eyes narrowed further. You're just an abomination from a bloodline that should have been put down instead of banished. Believing your bastard blood makes you stronger than our wolf warriors. You talk of training them, but I wonder if you just want to steal our secrets. There it was. The real blade, finally out in the open. My spine wanted to stiffen. My pride wanted to rise to meet his like two animals deciding which one got the ground. I didn't let it. I don't think my blood makes me special, I said. I think it makes me responsible, and I won't stand by and watch any of the wolf warriors die if some can live because of training that I can provide. Quill's mouth curled faintly. Convenient excuse to get close to us. Sam's head turned, sharp. Quill. Not an order. Not a warning. Something closer to enough. Quill didn't look at Sam. He wants access. To train our wolves. To put hands on our warriors. His eyes cut back to me. Tell us you won't try to take over the pack once you're in the middle of it. Billy didn't flinch at Quill's tone. He just watched me, patient, but absolute. The question was valid, even if Quill enjoyed the way it sounded. Sue's voice stayed calm, but it carried steel. And tell us you won't push them so hard that someone gets hurt trying to prove something. Terry added quietly, you can't walk into a group of young wolves and not change the shape of their pride. That's what training does. It rearranges hierarchy whether it intends to or not. The room went still, waiting. I nodded once. That's fair. Then I looked at Sam, because if this was going to work it had to be anchored to the person who would live with it after I left. I'm not here to lead, I said. Sam leads. Period. If training happens, it happens under his authority. He sets the rules. He calls it off if it turns wrong. And if anyone tries to treat me like a replacement, that's where it ends. Sam didn't soften, but something in his posture eased, one small degree. Quill's eyes stayed hard. Words. Then make it structure, I said. Put it in terms. Council oversight. Observed sessions. Limits. If you want a trial period with a clean end date, I'll sign it in whatever form you use, verbal, written, witnessed. I don't care. I want it clean. Billy's fingers tapped once on the arm of his chair. Thoughtful. Not impatient. Sue's attention sharpened. And not pushing too hard. I answered that without flinching. I'll be rough when it's necessary to teach reality. I won't be cruel. There's a difference. I'm not there to break them. I'm there to teach them what breaks them so they can stop it from happening in the field. Terry nodded once, slow. That's the right distinction. Quill's expression didn't change. And when one of them refuses to listen, that's when Sam steps in, I said, and kept my eyes on him. Because discipline isn't my job. It's his. I can give resistance. I can give scenarios. I can give consequences that don't leave scars. But I'm not taking your pack from you. Sam's voice came low, edged. And if someone decides to make it personal, I didn't pretend not to understand what he meant. Then I keep it impersonal. If I can't, then I will leave. Quill's mouth tightened like he didn't like how reasonable that sounded. He shifted targets. And Emily, Quill said, and the word hit the table like a stone. When you broke our rules and dragged her to a hospital where Cullens work. You put her under their eyes. Under their hands. You brought danger to her doorstep and acted like your judgment outranked our law. The room tightened again, but this time it wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at memory. I felt my jaw lock. Then I forced it open. I took her to the nearest place that could keep her alive, I said. Because she was bleeding, and I wasn't going to call around to see if there was a hospital I wasn't allowed to take her to. Had you bothered to acknowledge me enough to share your rules, it may have gone differently, but I doubt it. Quill's eyes flashed. You don't get to. Sam's voice cut cleanly through it. He saved her. Every head turned a fraction toward Sam. He didn't look at Quill when he said it. He looked at the table, like he was pinning the truth there so nobody could kick it aside. I didn't like how it happened, Sam continued, jaw tight. I didn't like the risk. I didn't like that it embarrassed us. But she lived. His voice roughened on the last word. And I'm not going to pretend I'd trade that for pride. If there is any blame to fall from that situation, it will fall on me for my lack of control causing it. Quill's nostrils flared, but he didn't speak. Sue's gaze flicked to Sam, approval, quiet and immediate, then back to me. That incident is exactly why we're asking these seemingly unfair questions, she said. You act fast. Sometimes alone. That can save someone, or it can start a war. I nodded once. I understand. Billy leaned forward slightly, eyes steady. So give us your assurance, Thomas. Not that you'll be perfect. That you'll be accountable. I didn't hesitate. I will not make decisions over Sam's head. I will not cross treaty lines with the Cullens. I will not turn training into a power grab. If this becomes about ego, for them or for me, it ends. And if I break your terms, I won't be around for you to warn me twice. That hung in the air a moment, solid. Terry's eyes stayed on my face. And why offer this at all? If you're not gaining power, land, or influence. I kept my voice simple. Because I live here. Because I'm Quillude by blood whether Quill likes it or not. Because Bella is my sister, and Charlie is my family, and if something comes for forks it won't stop at your imaginary line or mine. And because I don't want to attend any funeral that could have been prevented by better preparation. Sue's expression tightened at the word funeral in a way she tried not to show. It still showed. Billy sat back, considering. Then he looked down the line, Quill, Sue, Terry, Sam, and the room waited with him. Finally he spoke, measured, calm. We'll allow a trial, Billy said. Limited. Observed. Under Sam's authority. The council sets the boundaries. Sam sets the work. Terry nodded once. Clear start. Clear stop. Sue's voice followed, quiet and firm. And Seth trains too. If you're training wolves, you train all wolves. It wasn't a challenge. It was a fact. Seth may be young, but he wouldn't always be, and anything he could learn now would help later. Sam's gaze flicked to Sue for a heartbeat, acknowledgement, then back to me. You show up when I tell you, Sam said. You do the work. You don't make it complicated. I nodded once. I can do that. Quill didn't look pleased. But he also didn't stand up and veto it. Instead, he stared at me like a man carving warnings into stone. If you make my people pay for your temper, Quill said, I will remember. I met his eyes, steady. Then don't give me a reason to. It wasn't a threat. It was honesty. Billy's voice ended it before Quill could decide to push again. Sam and you will work out the terms. And then the questions began. Chapter 162, Planning for the Worst. Thomas POV. Terry Yindi didn't waste time. He leaned forward slightly, hands still, voice even, like he was asking about weather patterns instead of monsters. Start with the obvious, he said. Sam tells us you can fight with the strength of a cold one, how is that possible? Sam leaned forward at this question, curious himself to the point of being skeptical of the claim when it had been made. I let out a slow breath. My shifting ability has levels. I guess that's the best way to put it. Billy's gaze stayed steady. Sue's eyes didn't move off my face. Quill looked like he'd been waiting his whole life to hear an answer he could tear apart. As I understand it, when a Quileute wakes their shifting ability, they only have two forms. Their human form and their wolf form. I tipped my head slightly, though I have some confusion there, as from what I was told by the Cullens, the wolves they met in the past were normal wolf size. But Sam is easily twice the size of any dire wolf on record. Realizing I still hadn't answered their question, I got back on track. One of those levels I was talking about allows me to pull the strength increase from a shift into my human form. This has allowed me to spar in my human form with the Cullens. While not as strong as their strongest fighter, I am still comparable. Quill made a sharp sound in the back of his throat. Even as you speak of yourself, you still look for more information on our wolf warriors. Sue ignored Quill and spoke up, is this an ability you can share with the tribe? Or teach as part of your training? Sam leaned forward as if he could hardly wait to hear the answer. I shook my head once. I don't know. And I'm not going to lie and pretend I do. Whatever lets me do it may be tangled up in how my bloodlines mixed. Which means it might not be available to the wolf warriors at all. Terry's eyes narrowed slightly. Bloodlines. I glanced once at Billy, because he wasn't just listening, he was the steadying force of the room. My grandmother was Quileute, I said. Illyrium Black. That name had gravity. The black name was nearly sacred to the Quileutes, and to have one attached to it that most of them hadn't known about was a surprise. Billy didn't react outwardly, but his attention sharpened, like a file drawer had been opened in his mind. I could feel the questions stacking up behind his eyes, but I kept moving. And my grandfather, I continued, was from Nepal. He carried a different kind of shapeshifter bloodline. The tiger line. Quill's mouth tightened. Outside blood. Outside, I agreed, refusing to take the bait. His people bound his gift, sealed it, so he could live a normal life. He left his clan and went to sea because he wanted the wider world more than he wanted their rules. Terry's voice stayed calm. Bound by who? By his own community, I said. Their methods, their tradition. I don't know the mechanics. I only know the result. Billy's fingers tapped once against the arm of his chair. Not impatience. A metronome. A habit of years. My father had his gift bound too, I said. He wanted normal. He wanted a quiet life that didn't revolve around what he could become. Sue's gaze stayed on me, direct. And this binding didn't pass to you as a baby? No, I said simply. Whatever was bound in them didn't hold the same way in me. Or it didn't hold completely. Maybe my Quileute blood opened options for me that the rest of that clan didn't have, or I just thought outside their customs and got my own answers. Quill leaned in a fraction, eyes bright with the kind of anger that liked having an audience. So you're an accident? I kept my hands on the table, open and visible. I'm the result of bloodlines mixing. The way I see it, I got the best of both worlds. My body blended things that were never meant to meet. Everyone at the table pondered that for a time. It wasn't disbelief. It was the kind of silence you got when people were setting a new fact into the shape of everything else they already knew, testing whether it cracked their old stories or simply widened them. Billy's fingers tapped once against the arm of his chair. Quiet. Deliberate. I had noticed this habit of his multiple times today. Sue was the first to recover and push the conversation forward. Her having two very good reasons to learn all she could from me. Okay, she said evenly. That explains you for the most part, now tell us about what else we are facing. And don't try and speak ill of our abilities. The pack has already reported taking down that dark vampire. Quill interjected. I nodded, yes, Sam told me of that fight. However, that was a fight of 3 against 1. And, not to put the pack down, but it wasn't a fight without injury on their side. Sam frowned at that statement. Look, this new pack has taken down a solo vampire that was surprised to see them. Your stories so far as I know, speak of encountering these cold ones in singles or pairs. Nothing larger. Just last year there was a group of 4 traveling through the area. How do you think the pack would have fared if they encountered them? Sam nodded his head in acknowledgement of the danger, and the rest of the council looked worried at the prospect of such a large group. Hoping I wasn't pushing too much information too fast, I continued. These are just wandering vampires that slip into an area, feed, and move on, but there is a much greater danger out there called the Vulture. Sam held my gaze for a heartbeat, then looked away, not dismissing, just calculating. Pack leader math, how many? How soon? How bad? The Vulture, Sue repeated softly, as if tasting the word. What are they? They're a coven, I said. Not like the ones that pass through, nor are they like the Cullens. They're a government. A court. The ones who decide what the rules are for vampires, and what happens when someone breaks them. Quill let out a short, sharp breath. Vampires have rules. They have laws, I corrected. And enforcement. Terry's voice stayed even. Who do they enforce those laws on? Other vampires, I said. Mostly. Humans when it suits them. Anyone they decide is a threat to their secrecy. Or their control. Billy's eyes stayed on mine. Calm, but heavier now. And why are you telling us this? Because if they ever come here, I said carefully, you won't be dealing with one hungry vampire making a bad choice. You'll be dealing with a decision that's already been made, and dozens coming to enforce it. Sam's jaw tightened. You said vampires only move around in small groups or singly. I nodded. That's what I've heard in the stories. Lone hunters. Pairs. Small-time predators. And the Vulture aren't that, Sue said. No, I agreed. They don't drift. They don't hunt like that. They don't stumble into trouble. They bring it. Terry tapped once on the tabletop, mirroring Billy's earlier rhythm. Numbers. No accurate count, I said. But I have personally seen more than 20 in one place. And nothing organized stops at 20. Sue's fingers pressed together once, hard enough her knuckles went pale, then relaxed again. Controlled. Quill scoffed, but there was less satisfaction in it now. And you expect us to believe you've seen them? I didn't rise to it. You can choose not to believe me. But the smart play is to plan like it might be true anyway. Billy's gaze didn't leave my face. Why would they come to Forks? I heard it in his tone, not disbelief. Not denial. Cause and effect. I answered the same way. Because Forks is already unusual, I said. Because the Cullens living nearby makes this area noticeable. Because supernatural problems attract supernatural attention. And because the Volturi don't like unknowns. Sam spoke quietly, grim. Unknowns like wolves. Unknowns like anything they can't control, I said. If they decide this region is a risk, or that someone broke a law, they won't send one vampire to ask questions. They'll send enough to make the answer final. The room fell silent again, but it wasn't combative silence. It was a listening silence. Sue broke it. So what makes them worse than numbers? I didn't hesitate. Gifts. Quill's eyes narrowed. More vampire fairy tales. Not fairy tales, I said, voice steady. Abilities. Some vampires can do things beyond strength and speed. The Volturi collect those vampires. Terry's gaze stayed locked on mine. Name what you know. I took a breath. The next part was always the part that made people's shoulders stiffen. Two that you need to understand because they change how you survive, I said. Jane. And her brother, Alec. Sam went very still at the names, the way a fighter goes still when the threat stops being theoretical. Sue didn't move, but the air around her sharpened. Billy's eyes narrowed the slightest amount. Explain. Jane can inflict pain without touching you, I said. She looks at you, focuses, and your body collapses. Not because she injures you. Because your nervous system gets punished from the inside. You can't tough it out. You can't bite down and keep moving. Your body refuses. Quill's face twisted with anger at the thought that the pack could be so helpless. Sam's voice came low, questioning. Line of sight. As far as I know, I said. She needs a target she can fix on. Cover matters. Breaking sight lines matters. Terry didn't blink. And the brother? Alec is worse, I said bluntly. His ability is believed to be an area of effect power. He can take away your senses. Sight. Hearing. Smell. Everything. You could be standing next to your pack and not know it. You could be hurt and never hear help coming. You could be surrounded and still be alone. Sue inhaled slowly through her nose and let it out. Her eyes stayed on me, direct. If that's true, that changes everything. It changes how you plan, I corrected. It doesn't change who you are. Wolves are still wolves. It just means bravery isn't enough. You need habit. You need spacing. You need options. Quill snapped, and how do you know any of this? I kept my tone even. From what I've seen. From what I've been told by people who've survived them. I'm not asking you to take it as gospel. I'm asking you to take it as risk. The kind you plan for because the cost of being wrong is bodies. Billy's gaze stayed calm. You said your sister is tied to the same vampire family as you. So your information comes through them. Some of it, I admitted. But not all of it is, Cullen whispers. And either way, it doesn't matter where warning comes from if the warning keeps people alive. Sue's voice turned quiet and sharp. And the pack bond. That was the real reason she'd leaned in, I could tell. Not curiosity. Fear with a name. This was an exceptionally smart woman. Terry's head tilted slightly. Explain. I chose honesty over certainty. This part is theory, I said. Not proof. But it's a reasonable fear. Sam's jaw clenched, now realizing where I was going. You share through the bond, I continued. Urgency. Emotion. Memories. If one wolf can feel what another wolf feels across that link, it isn't crazy to ask whether an ability that attacks senses or the mind might follow the same road. The silence after that was heavier than the first mention of the Volturi. Because that wasn't about fighting a monster. That was about the thing that made them strongest, possibly becoming the thing that got them killed. Sue's voice came out low. Controlled. You're saying one wolf could drop and take the rest with them. I'm saying it's possible, I replied. And if it's possible, you don't want to learn it during a fight. Quill's chair creaked as he shifted, anger hunting for a target it could actually bite. And this theory comes from where? I didn't dodge, but I didn't volunteer more than I had to either. I've seen a mind reader touch the edge of the bond, I said. Accidental. Brief. It ended as soon as it was recognized. Quill's eyes went cold. A Cullen. Yes, I said. A Cullen. Sue's jaw tightened once, then she steadied herself like a woman who'd already buried her husband and refused to let fear make her sloppy. Then we plan for the worst and pray it never comes. Billy nodded faintly at that, approval of the mindset, not the pain behind it. Terry folded his hands, considering. So the threat isn't just vampires. It's vampires with structure. Yes, I said. And with tools that don't care how strong your claws are. Sam exhaled slowly, like the air had been sitting on his lungs for a minute. And if the Volturi come, what do? They ask questions, I said. And if they don't like the answers, they don't argue. They erase. Quill's mouth tightened. And you're telling us this now as a sales pitch? I looked at him, steady. I'm telling you this now because you asked what else is out there. Billy's voice cut in, quiet authority. Enough. Not anger. Just a line drawn in cedar and bone. Quill shut his mouth, but his eyes stayed hard. Billy's gaze held mine. If they have numbers and gifts and laws, then what stops them? I didn't like my answer. Other vampires, I said. Distance. Secrecy. Being too small to be worth the effort. And not giving them a reason to decide you're a problem. Sam's expression tightened. We don't get to choose what they decide. No, I agreed. But we can choose whether we're ready if the decision ever comes. Terry leaned forward a fraction, voice still calm, too calm. And you're saying this isn't imminent? I'm saying I don't have a clock, I said. I don't know if it's next year or never. I know it exists. I know what they can do. And I know pretending they don't is the kind of mistake people only get to make once. Billy's eyes stayed on mine for a long moment. Then he nodded, small, but decisive. Not agreement with everything, just acceptance that the world was larger than the stories they'd been allowed to keep. All right, he said. We have your warning. He paused, gaze cutting down the table, Sue, Terry, Quill, Sam, then back to me. Then we're done with the storm stories, Billy said evenly. Not because they aren't real. Because we have what we need from them. His eyes held mine. You came here for clarity. You gave it. I let out a slow breath through my nose, careful not to let relief look like victory. This wasn't that kind of room. Sue's voice came next, quiet but firm. If we're planning for worst case, we need discipline as much as strength. Sam nodded once, minimal. Agreement without softness. Terry's attention stayed on me. You said you don't have a clock. But you do have instincts. If you ever feel that pressure change, if you hear something, see something. I'll bring it to Sam, I said immediately. Not to stir people up. Just to keep you informed. That earned a small, approving nod from Terry, like he respected the answer more than he liked the topic. Quill leaned back in his chair, expression still carved into stone. And don't you come here acting like you're our savior. I won't, I said, meeting his eyes without sharpening mine. I'm a tool you can use. Or not. That choice stays yours. His mouth tightened, but he didn't have an easy angle to cut into that. Billy's fingers tapped once against the arm of his chair, the same metronome as before. Sam will set the first session. Council terms will be simple. Observed. Limited. No interfering. I understand, I said. Sue's gaze held mine. And when you're training Leah? I train wolves, I said, keeping my voice even. Not favorites. Something in her shoulders loosened that she probably hadn't meant to show. Sam finally spoke again, voice low and practical. You show up alone. You do what I tell you. You don't let Paul, or anyone else, turn it into a circus. I won't, I said. If someone tries, I toss them your way, and you handle it. Sam's eyes stayed on me a beat longer, then he nodded once. Not trust. Not yet. But a working line drawn in the dirt. Billy's gaze moved to each of them again, quietly taking attendance on consensus, then returned to me. You gave us answers, he said. You didn't sidestep. You didn't hide behind the Cullen name. That matters. I inclined my head. I came straight. Like I said I would. Billy's expression didn't soften, but the room eased, like it could breathe again. Then take that same approach when you're in the field with the young ones. The first time you embarrass someone, pride will try to make a weapon out of it. I know, I said. I'll keep it about work. Terry's voice came mild, almost approving. Good. Work is cleaner than ego. Quill made a quiet sound, still unhappy, but he didn't argue. Not now. Not with the terms already set. Billy lifted his hand, small motion, absolute. Then this meeting is finished. I pushed my chair back carefully, stood, and set it in place. No scraping. No theatrics. Just respect in the small motions. Thank you for hearing me, I said. I only want to help the pack. At the door, Billy's voice followed one last time, steady as the building itself. Thomas. I turned. His eyes held mine. The world is bigger than our stories, thank you for bringing us more to add to them. I nodded once. Believe it or not, but Edythe Cullen was the one that pushed me to help. I was content in my fear you wouldn't let me, and didn't want to bring it up in case I alienated the pack. I am glad it all worked out. Then I closed the door. Outside, the rain had eased into a fine mist that made the porch boards shine. I stepped down into the night, the hall's warmth closing behind me, and felt the weight in my chest settle into something steadier. Not fear. Not triumph. Responsibility, shared, named, and finally pointed in the same direction. Chapter 163, The First Session. Thomas POV. It was Friday night, 3 days since the council meeting and the night of the first training I would be doing with the pack. Edythe was with Alice, Bella, and Jessica at Angela's for a girls' night. Helping Angela hand-address her graduation invitations while they talked about boys, I assumed. Perfect timing as far as I was concerned. The full moon shone from above, and that irony wasn't lost on me as I ran through the forest to the meeting place with my backpack in my mouth. Almost there. Sam, who all am I training with tonight? You will have me, Paul, Jacob, and Seth for this first go. Sue and Terry will be watching as well. I felt a little disappointment that Leah wouldn't be there but shoved it aside. I am just minutes away, but I will stop and get my clothes on before I get there. Everyone know what's happening, I assume. Sounds good, but how are we going to communicate? Best I can figure is a lot of charades, or I stick to yes or no questions. At worst, you have to shift to ask a complicated question. Sam just went quiet in thought, I assumed. Okay, I am close. I will get dressed and see you in just a minute. I found a pocket of shadow where the ferns grew thick and the ground dipped, hidden from any line of sight. Muscle memory did the rest. The world snapped into human shape with a familiar jolt, bones rearranging, lungs remembering their smaller limits, the forest suddenly too loud and too quiet at the same time. I reached for the backpack beside my feet and exhaled through my nose. My skin prickled in the night air, as I quickly dressed. Okay, I muttered to myself, like saying it out loud could settle my nerves into something useful. Let's not fuck this up. I zipped up the now empty backpack, slung it over my shoulder, then headed toward where I could hear activity. The clearing opened up ahead and I paused to take it all in. Not big, just a break in the trees where the ground leveled out and the moonlight could reach. Damp grass glinted silver. A few fallen logs formed natural benches around the edge. Sue Clearwater and Terry Yindy stood together near one of the logs, both of them bundled against the chill. Sue's arms were crossed, posture steady, face unreadable in that way that made it clear she didn't waste emotion on displays. Terry was still, hands folded, watching the woods like he was listening with more than just ears. And then there were the wolves. 4 shapes moved in the shadow line at the far end of the clearing, too large, too smooth, too quiet for anything natural. Sam was unmistakable even without the pack mind, the way the others oriented around him gave him away. Paul paced a small circle like he had energy he didn't know what to do with. Jacob stood slightly apart, he wasn't pacing, he was waiting. That alone told me he'd decided this was important. The final wolf, I could tell, was still mostly a puppy. His legs looked too long, and his body was still developing. The paws looked comically large. I knew at a glance that this was Seth. He hovered a little closer to the elders than the others, a golden-brown blur that kept glancing between Sue and Sam like he was making sure everyone was okay. Or that he was really okay being there. Half afraid he was there by mistake and soon he would be told to go home. I walked out into the moonlight with my hands empty and visible. "Evening," I said, keeping it simple. I nodded once to Sue and Terry. "Sue. Terry." Then I angled my voice toward Sam, toward all of them, really, because even if they couldn't answer in words right now, they could hear me. "Sam. Jacob. Paul. Seth." I let my gaze land on each wolf in turn, no challenge in it, just acknowledgement. "Thanks for showing up." Paul's pacing didn't stop, but it tightened like he was circling the idea of me more than the clearing. Jacob didn't move. Seth's ears flicked forward. I hooked my backpack strap off my shoulder and set it by the logs, out of the way. "No fuss. Before we start," I said, raising my voice slightly so it carried cleanly, "I assume Jared and Leah are on patrol tonight." Sam's head nodded a fraction, confirmation without words. "And I know they'll be hearing pieces of this through the pack mind while they're out there," I continued. "That's fine. That's good. The point isn't secrecy. The point is consistency." Sue's posture stayed steady, but her attention sharpened at Leah's name, small, controlled, present. I shifted my stance, so I was facing the wolves more than the observers. "All right. Here's what we're doing tonight, and why." I held up one finger. "First, we set rules. Safety rules. Not pride rules. Second finger. Second, we get a baseline. I need to see how you move when you're not trying to win, just trying to stay alive. Third finger. Third, we do 2 short blocks. Sam and Seth first. Jacob and Paul second. Same drills, same expectations. No improvising. No freelancing." I let my hand drop and looked straight at Sam, because he was the anchor whether anyone liked it or not. "Everything we do tonight runs under your authority," I said. "If you call stop, we stop. If Sue or Terry call stop, we stop. If someone gets stupid, you handle it, because discipline isn't my job. Training is." Paul's tail lashed once. As if he was frustrated he couldn't make an comment that I could hear. I turned my head slightly, so my voice hit him specifically. "And before you decide you want to make this personal, don't." Paul's pacing paused. His ears angled forward, hostile curiosity. "This isn't a dominance contest," I said evenly. "If you try to turn it into one, you'll waste everyone's time, and you'll prove to your leader that you can't be trusted with training meant to keep you alive." Jacob's ears twitched, approval, maybe. Or just agreement that Paul needed hearing it. Seth's tail flicked like he was relieved someone else was taking the heat. "I see no need for convoluted signals, as you all can understand me just fine and I will stay in human form the whole time." Then I looked to Sam again. "You good with that?" Sam's wolf head dipped once. "Sharp. Decisive." "Good," I said. "Then we begin." I stepped back into the center of the clearing and rolled my shoulders, letting the familiar strength settle into my muscles, not a full shift, not anything dramatic, just enough that this body could take a hit and give one back without breaking. "Sam. Seth." I pointed to the open space in front of me. "You're up first. Just go with your instinct and we will see how that works out." Seth hesitated for half a heartbeat, then moved, quick and light, like he was trying to be brave without being loud about it. Sam followed, steady as a shadow. Both wolves started to circle me, looking for openings. So, I showed Sam one by stepping toward Seth. Seth responded to my step by backing up and centering his gravity so he could move in whatever direction I wasn't approaching in. Sam, however, took advantage of my attention being on Seth and leapt at me without hesitation. I quickly spun and moved my right palm to meet Sam, who was in the air, unable to react to my fast movement. I struck his shoulder, and he fell on his side and slid a couple of feet. I relaxed my posture and stepped back. First thing, never go for the obvious kill. "Sam, you jumped at me as if you would go through me with all your force. That may work for a hunt, but for someone who can set up false openings it's suicide. If I had been a normal vampire I wouldn't have hit you with my palm, but my stiffened fingers and shoved my whole arm through your body." Sam stood up from where he fell, and a growl of frustration escaped from his maw. I continued, "In a fight, it would have been better if you timed your jump to land just before you would attack me, so if I moved, you still had options to follow up on the attack or leap back and provide a possible distraction for Seth to attack." I moved my eyes to Seth. "You reacted quickly, Seth, but you only thought about moving right or left, and that caused you to be unable to capitalize when I turned my back towards you while I attacked Sam. You have 4 legs in this form, your balance will change with whatever paw you shift first. Practice changing direction from a standstill." I moved back to the starting point. "Okay, reset and let's go again." They again started pacing around me and again I stepped toward Seth. Seth reacted exactly like I had expected the young wolf to react. He shifted his weight forward, ready to lunge, ready to prove he belonged in the same clearing as everyone else. Sam shifted too, not in panic, but in leadership reflex: protect the youngest, close the angle, keep the pack shape tight. Which was the point? "Good," I said, voice calm even as my body moved. "You both saw the same thing and answered it." Seth sprang. He was fast, faster than any normal animal had a right to be, but fast wasn't the same as clean. He committed his whole body to the attack, front heavy, jaw aimed like that would solve the problem by itself. Just like Sam had done previously. I didn't meet him head on. I slid a half step to the side and let my left forearm catch the line of his shoulder, not a strike, a redirect, guiding his momentum past me instead of letting it crash into me. My right hand pressed lightly into the thick fur at the base of his neck, just enough to turn his head with his own movement. Seth skidded in the damp grass, claws tearing divots as he tried to recover. Sam was already there, intent on stopping me from following up on Seth. He came in low, not like Seth, not thrown by enthusiasm. Sam's movement was controlled, angled, smart, like he was trying to set his teeth where it would end the exchange fast. A vampire would have eaten that up. I pivoted, planted my feet, and met Sam's charge with my hands open and my elbows tight, letting the strength in my frame do the work. When his shoulder hit my forearm, I gave him just enough resistance to stop the forward drive, then shifted my weight and turned him, using leverage more than force, like redirecting a barbell rather than fighting it. Sam's paws dug in. He didn't go down, but he lost the straight line. That, I said, breath steady, is what you don't want to give them. Seth recovered and came again, this time not as clean as he thought, because he'd already decided he needed to hit faster and harder to make up for missing the first time. I stepped back one pace, drew him toward me, then angled away at the last second so he had to adjust mid-lunge. He did, barely, his body twisting to follow. Don't chase the bait, I told him, and this time it wasn't a lecture. It was a warning. If I can make you chase it, so can they. Sam took the opening Seth created without meaning to. He moved to my blind side, trying to make me split attention. For a heartbeat it worked, my gaze tracked him, and Seth surged in again, eager to be the one who landed something. I let my shoulders turn toward Sam. Then I snapped back toward Seth instead, because Seth was the one acting on impulse. Still sloppy. He hit my chest, not full force, because I'd already shifted the angle, but enough that I felt the impact through my ribs. I absorbed it, then slid my hands under his chest and along his shoulder line and lifted just enough to rob him of traction. Seth's front paws left the ground for a second. He froze in surprise, just long enough. I set him down immediately, controlled, careful, and stepped away so it didn't turn into humiliation. Reset, I said. Back up. Same start. They backed off, circling again. Sue's eyes stayed locked on the exchange, unreadable, but not anxious. Terry watched like he was counting patterns. Sam's tail flicked once, irritation, at me, at himself, at the fact that he was being made to play defense in front of observers. I didn't let him sit in that. Sam, I said, holding his gaze as best I could in a wolf face, that was good leadership instinct. Protect the youngest. But a smart opponent will use that instinct against you. Sam stilled, listening. And Seth, I added, you're fast. But you're loud with it. You announce what you want to do with your whole body. Seth's ears dipped a fraction, embarrassment, maybe. I kept it neutral. That's normal. That's fixable. Nothing to be ashamed of. We went again. This time I didn't step toward Seth. I stepped toward space, the empty line between them, like I wasn't committing to either target. It forced both wolves to decide what I was doing without the comfort of certainty. Sam moved first, because leaders do. Seth followed half a beat later. Half a beat was enough. I darted left, fast, and stopped short, just short, so Seth's momentum carried him into the space he thought I'd occupy. Sam snapped at the same time Seth moved, trying to catch me on the shift. I could have hit Seth hard right then. I didn't. Instead, I angled my shoulder into his flank, not enough to hurt, enough to spin him, then used that spin to put Seth between Sam and me. Sam checked himself instantly. He didn't crash into Seth. He didn't take the reckless bite. He pulled the strike, because he had control. That was a win. Good, I said immediately. That's what control looks like. Sam's ears twitched, accepting it. Seth's tail wagged once, involuntary. He was proud he hadn't gotten in the way. Or proud Sam hadn't steamrolled him. Either way, it was useful. I backed up and lifted my hands again, palms out. All right. That's enough for you two to work on. I turned my head toward Sue and Terry for a second, not asking permission, just acknowledging the observation. Sam died 3 times in that exchange and Seth 5. This is what we are here to prevent. Then back to the wolves. Sam, Seth, hold. Catch your breath. I walked to the log edge, picked up a small branch, nothing heavy, and drew a simple line in the damp grass with the tip. Line, I said. This is what most of you do when you're excited. I drew a straight arrow forward. You charge. Straight. Fast. Heavy. It works when you have pack pressure and numbers. I drew 3 more arrows converging. It worked on Laron. Then I drew a curved line that hooked around the arrows. This is what an older vampire does. They don't meet the charge. They bend it. They make you overshoot. They make you separate. I looked up at Sam. You kept the group shape better than most would. Seth didn't panic when he missed. That's good. Seth's ears perked. But, I added, you both still react to the youngest being threatened like it's the only priority. That's not wrong. It's just predictable. Paul's pacing slowed at that, attention catching whether he wanted it to or not. Jacob's posture shifted, listening. Goal for Sam and Seth, I said, loud enough for the whole clearing. Sam learns to keep leadership without overcommitting to protection. Seth learns to commit without telegraphing and without chasing. I pointed the stick toward the open space. Now, swap. Chapter 164, Listening Distance. Thomas POV. Sam moved back to the edge line with the others. Seth followed, and as he passed Sue's hand lifted slightly, didn't touch him, didn't break the boundary, just hovered like she wanted to and stopped herself. Seth glanced at her, then joined Sam. He had trained as an equal, he belonged here and had clear goals to work on. Jacob and Paul stepped forward. Jacob came controlled. He didn't rush. He didn't puff himself up. He just moved into position like he was stepping into a job that needed doing. Paul came like a challenge. He didn't pace now. He stalked. Head low, shoulders rolling, the kind of movement that screamed prove it. Same rules, I said, before he could make a game of it. This isn't about who's strongest. It's about what works when the other side doesn't care how strong you are. Paul's eyes fixed on me, bright, hot. I didn't blink, I didn't flinch. You want to hit something, I said evenly, hit the drill. Jacob's ears flicked, amusement or approval. Paul's tail snapped once, and he growled at Jacob. He must have said something over the pack link Paul didn't like. I stepped into the center again and rolled my shoulders, settling into my stance. Jacob, I said, your first contact. Paul, your second. You don't both commit at once. I want to see if you can hold back without feeling like it makes you weak. Paul's lip curled slightly, wolf equivalent of a sneer. I pointed at him with one finger. That look? That's exactly why I'm making you do it. Jacob's posture went stiller, focused. Paul's muscles tightened like he was about to ignore me out of spite. I didn't raise my voice. If you can't follow directions, you can leave now and save us time. The clearing held its breath. Paul stared. Then, grudgingly, he shifted his weight back half an inch, compliance that looked like it hurt him. Good, I said, and meant it. Jacob. Go. Jacob moved. Not with Seth's enthusiastic lunge, Jacob came in with a feint, testing my hands, testing my feet, reading how I reacted. Smarter. Harder. I let him close, then gave him a small opening, shoulder turned, weight slightly forward, something that looked like a mistake. Jacob took it. And Paul, because Paul was Paul, started to surge. I said sharply. Paul stopped mid-drive like the word itself had teeth. Jacob's ears flicked, he'd heard it too. Jacob, I said, moving with him, you're going to learn something tonight. Sometimes the best move isn't the bite. Sometimes it's making the other guy think you'll bite so he wastes his defense. Jacob adjusted instantly, changed angle, tried to hook around my legs and tangle my feet. I pivoted, kept my balance, and then stepped in close enough that my shoulder pressed into his chest. Not a strike. A check. A reminder that humans could still occupy space. Jacob braced. Paul's patience snapped again. He surged, this time committing. I'd been waiting for it. I turned, planted, and met Paul's charge with the same open-palmed control I'd used on Sam, except Paul hit harder, because Paul always hit harder. The impact rang through my arms. I didn't give ground. I didn't win by strength. I won by angle, turning his force aside and letting him slide past my center line into empty air. Paul skidded, claws tearing up wet earth. And Jacob did what I wanted. He didn't chase Paul's miss. He didn't pile on. He stayed on me. Smart. Useful. I let that exchange run for 3 more beats, just long enough for patterns to show, then lifted a hand. Stop. They froze. Paul's body still vibrating with the urge to keep going, Jacob steady, breathing controlled. I looked at Paul. You see what you just did? Paul stared. You committed on emotion, I said. Not instruction. Which means an opponent can make you commit whenever he wants. Paul's ears flattened slightly, furious. Good, I added, before he could turn it into a fight. Be mad. Then learn anyway. I turned my gaze to Jacob. And you, good restraint. That's how you survive an enemy that wants to split you. Jacob's head dipped once. Another thing you are all doing, is equating the human body you see in front of you with the weakness of a human. You could charge full bore into my body and not shift me in the slightest, and my body is just at a normal vampire level. You must mentally adjust for that. I stepped back, resetting my stance. Again. Same start. And Paul, this time you wait until I give the cue. Paul's tail lashed. Jacob's ears twitched like he was trying not to look entertained. Seth, at the edge, leaned forward like he couldn't help it. Sue's attention stayed sharp, not on my strength, but on how I corrected them, whether I was fair, whether I was controlled. Terry watched like he was cataloging the difference between rough and cruel. I looked at the wolves, then at the moonlight cutting through the trees. All right, I said, voice steady. Let's do it right. Leah POV. The night around me was as quiet as I could ask for, the noise in my head was more than enough to deal with right now. I paused to look over the cliffs that marked the westernmost boundary of our land. Normally there wasn't much to see, but with tonight's full moon it was easy to make out the beauty of the sea at night. Taking an extra sniff at the passing breeze, I was content that there was nothing unusual here tonight. Sam had informed us that he had come across some vampire traces he didn't recognize last week and wanted us to stay alert. Relaxing for a moment, my mind drifted down the pack link to a clearing just a few miles from here. Hard to stay focused on rounds when we would both rather be in that clearing training, right Leah? Jared's thought pulled me away from obsessing over Thomas's explanation of what he hoped to accomplish with tonight's training. Yet, being able to train against someone with the strength and speed of a vampire will really help us know where we stand. Just going by your memories of tearing that one vampire apart isn't much help in that. Yet, came the reply. As easy as we say it was, Thomas has the right of it. That was 3-on-1. And I still got knocked back so hard I thought half my bones were broken. Took nearly a full day for the bruises to go away. Beside that, I started moving again, continuing to sweep our land's border. My mind was distracted for a moment by Seth as he was excited to be part of the first training pair. His desperation to prove himself was impossible to hide from the link. Moving at a slower pace than normal so I could focus on Thomas, the training he was doing. I wanted to make sure he didn't rough Seth up too much. Okay, that was a hard sell even to myself. With Mom there, she would step in if needed. Not that it would get that far, the whole pack was rather protective of my little brother. His enthusiasm was contagious and the kid had heart for days. He was just so desperate to grow up and take his place in the pack. Thomas would be gentle with him, I just know it. As much as he lowered himself during the council meeting, he seemed desperate to get permission for this training. Paul kept going over Sam's memories of that event and took joy in pointing out how weak Thomas came across at several points. If I was honest, I was a little confused by his actions. He usually came across as so confident and strong, it was a shock to see him so passive. I wonder if there is a story there I am not seeing? Because the control he is asserting over the training I am catching glimpses of does not show him in a passive light at all. Jared's amusement brushed my mind as I focused on Thomas. You tune in much more, and you're going to lose your footing here. I didn't turn to look at him, I'm on patrol. Jared thought back, and I could feel the grin in his reply. That's why you're hyper-focused on his lips as he speaks. I sent him a flash of irritation. Jared just let it slide off him, not taking it seriously. He never did with me, not the way Paul did. Paul took everything as a challenge, Jared was more like a pillow, he just absorbed the hit and smiled back. Relax, Jared added, softer. You're allowed to be curious. Curious? That was a neat, harmless word. A word that didn't smell like need. The truth was uglier than curious, but I wasn't going to hand it to the pack mind like a gift-wrapped confession. So I did what I always did. I walled it off. I pushed the thought down into the quiet corner of myself where it couldn't echo. A burst of pride overwhelmed the pack link. Seth was happy with the training. The support Thomas gave him was doing wonders. Seth had a direction to self-train in now. A purpose to focus his energy on. My chest tightened in happiness for him. He was starting to truly recover from the loss of Dad. I pulled up short there, any thoughts along those lines just led me down a path of depression and self-blame. Jared's thoughts nudged again, gentler now. Seems Thomas has a way with the kid, he said. Don't start, I shot back. I'm not starting, Jared replied, too innocent. I'm observing. Like you. I hated that he could make it sound normal. Though internally, I had made up my mind. Next time I was around Thomas, I would not hide behind a wall of anger. I need to see if I really feel the way Edythe implied that I did, and I can't do that if I'm not open to it. Trying to change the subject, Jared asked. Do you think Sam will finally come clean with Thomas about Embry and Quill having shifted already? I hate that they aren't part of this training just because the tribe want to be all secretive. I let out a sigh, I really don't know. This Sam is different from the one I knew. There is the man who really likes Thomas and can never repay him for saving Emily. And then there is the pack leader who doesn't fully trust anyone, not of the pack. Not even the elders fully. Oh, look. Jared interrupted. It's Jacob and Paul's turn. I will put $10 on Paul trying to start something with Thomas. I'll take that bet. I said quickly. No way Thomas lets it go that far, he gave up his dignity to get this training going. He has to have a plan to keep Paul in line. 20 minutes later Jared let out a sigh, I will pay up next time I see you and I have pockets. I huffed mentally, you mean, after you borrow it from Embry? Right. Hey, I have a payday coming up. Dad has been impressed with my work lately. I have so much more energy and strength since the shift. My gut clenched, and I tried to keep my thoughts clear. But I wasn't fast enough. Shit. Sorry, Leah. I wasn't thinking. No. It's okay, Jared. I should be used to it by now. Not like I can change it. Jared sighed, look, I know I'm overstepping here, but you have to let this go, Leah. No one blames you, not Seth, and least of all your mom. It happened, it sucks, but no one is at fault. The world just sucks sometimes. What's that quote our English teacher has up on the wall? We suffer more in our imagination than we ever will in reality, or something like that. I tried to think of a way to explain it, and as I gathered my thoughts, Jared kept quiet and just ran beside me. I can hear that and kind of understand and even accept that sometimes, Jared. I have spent time hating our gift, hating the Cullens for being here and triggering it, even at Mom for making me mad that night. I feel like I'm making progress in forgiving myself, and then I see the sadness in their eyes, the loss, and it's back to square one, all the self-loathing and hate rushing up and overtaking me. Realizing that he wasn't doing me any good, Jared let it drop with a final statement. Just give it time, Leah. And remember, the living need to live. The dead have done all of that they can. We finished our rounds in silence after that. Then after checking in with Sam, we separated and I went home to stare at the ceiling. Chapter 165, Cruising Altitude PT1. Sorry for running late all, had to make a surprise trip to KC, enjoy. Thomas POV. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached cruising altitude, and the seat belt sign has been turned off. Please feel free to move about the cabin as we begin our non-stop flight to Jacksonville International. The time is now just after 8 p.m. Pacific. The flight time is approximately 6 hours, which will have us landing at about 5 a.m. local time. Once again, thank you for choosing us for the flight's destination. The announcement faded into the steady hum of the engines, but my brain refused to settle. I kept replaying the last 48 hours like someone had spun my life on a roulette wheel and the ball hadn't stopped bouncing yet. A gentle reminder from Edward to Bella about expiring plane tickets, a few snide comments from Charlie that somehow got Bella's back up, and bam, I was strapped into a seat at 30,000 feet headed toward Jacksonville to explain to Aunt Renee that I'd be getting married in just under 2 weeks. The whiplash still had me blinking. How did I get dragged into the whole thing? My original plan had been elegant in its cowardice: mail pictures, include a polite "sorry you weren't invited" note, and let the fallout hit somewhere safely on the other side of the Rockies. Preferably with a forwarding address attached to it that was not mine. Bella, across the aisle, looked too pleased with herself to be innocent. The smile on her face might have been because she was seeing her mother for the first time in nearly a year, but I was pretty sure it was also anticipation for the coming explosion. "Are you okay, Tiger?" Edythe's hand was in mine, cool and steady. I gave it a reassuring squeeze. Just wondering how I went from the safe job of training giant wolves, to flying off to visit my scary marriage should be illegal until 40, yet loving aunt. Edythe laughed quietly. "I can't wait to meet her. She sounds like a very special woman." I leaned over and kissed her, briefly, because we were still pretending to be normal humans in a metal tube with strangers. "She is a wonderful woman," I murmured against her lips. "With some heavy prejudices." Edythe's mouth curved. "And we're about to trip every single one of them." "Like a professional trip artist," I said with a sigh. "I only hope she sees how close Edward and Bella are in following our lead, so I'm not her only target." Bella heard that and made a sound that was half laugh, half warning. "Don't use me as a shield." "I'm not using you as a shield," I said. "I'm using you as supporting evidence." Edward's expression didn't change, because of course it didn't, but his eyes flicked toward me. "If Renee has an issue with this, it won't be about evidence." "Great," I muttered. "So, what will it be about?" Bella answered, far too cheerful for someone who grew up with Renee's emotional weather. "Tone. Timing. Atmosphere. The phase of the moon. Whether she's had coffee. If she is still pissed at your mom for the Vegas wedding. You know, stuff she finds important." Edythe's shoulders shook with silent amusement. "Then we should plan accordingly." I stared ahead at the seat back like it might offer a strategy. "Okay. Logistics." Edythe tilted her head. How do we tell her?" I asked. "Do we lead with surprise, we're getting married, or do we let her notice your ring and explode on her own?" Edythe's gaze dropped to her left hand, to the ring there, and she made a thoughtful sound. "If she notices it first, she'll feel clever. That might buy you 30 seconds. 30 seconds, I repeated. Excellent. In that time, I can, what, Duck behind Phil. Phil will back you, Bella said, more confident about that than anything she'd said in the last year. He's calmer. Good, I said. I need at least one adult on my side. Edward's voice cut in, maddeningly smooth. You're forgetting Edythe. I'm not forgetting her, I said. I'm accounting for the fact that she will be charming, polite, and terrifyingly reasonable. Edythe smiled sweetly. I can do charming. And terrifying, I added. Her thumb brushed the back of my hand, light, steady, and grounding. And you can be honest. That's what she'll respect, even if she fights it at first. I looked at her for a long moment. There were 1,000 things I could say, about how much that steadiness meant, about how being seen by her made it harder to lie to myself, but this wasn't the place for poetry. You're saying strike first and stand my ground, I said instead. Exactly, Edythe replied. I exhaled, slow. Sounds like a plan. Across the aisle, Bella pulled the airline blanket up to her chin and snuggled into Edward's shoulder. The cabin lights dimmed a notch. Someone behind us clicked an overhead vent open, the sound sharp in the quiet. Edward watched the cabin like he always did, still as a statue that only pretended to be human when it was polite. Bella's voice softened as she settled. Mom is going to be, a lot. But she's excited to see us. She's been calling every day since I told her we were coming. I'm just glad the first couple of days will be cloudy, so you don't have to hide in the house the whole time. She yawned. She has tons of places she plans to take us. We might even go to a couple of them. Edythe made a soft, approving sound. Clouds are good. Clouds are life, I agreed, then caught myself and added, for you, anyway. Edythe's smile warmed in that quiet way she had, like it belonged to someone who remembered how to live now. For me. For us. The plane drifted on, suspended between where we'd been and what was waiting. And for a few minutes, blessedly, my mind stayed where it belonged, on the coming conversation, on the fact that I wasn't running from it, on the simple truth that I was choosing this. Choosing her. Choosing the mess that came with building a life in the open. I stared out the window. The world below was ink black, cloud tops faintly silvered by moonlight. The plane felt like it was floating through nothing. And because my brain hated peace, it finally circled back to the wolves. Speaking of training, I said, keeping my voice low, the last few sessions have been going very well. Edythe's attention turned fully to me, not sharp, not suspicious. Just present. Tell me. I sat back and let myself think. Jacob and Leah have made the most improvement. Other than Seth, but he started with no real knowledge, so he has the farthest to go. I think he's hitting a plateau that'll hold him back until he matures. And the others? She asked. Sam is too worried about how everyone else is doing to put in 100%, I said. Paul is only doing what he feels is necessary and waiting for every opportunity to prove he's better than me. Jared is. I paused, searching for the right shape of the thought. It's like he has no independence. No. That's not the right word. Edythe waited. He's never one to strike first, I finished. He's the set-up man. Always looking to make opportunities for others to succeed. A true beta, with no interest in being anything else. Edythe's expression softened, like she understood why that mattered. That's not a weakness. I know, I said. Just, noticeable. There was another thought, prickling at the back of my skull. Something else is going on too. It's subtle, but I've been picking up more wolf scent than just the 6 of them. I think they're holding out on me. My jaw tightened. The lack of trust is irritating. Edythe sighed, quiet, patient. You can't make them trust you, love. All you can do is what you're doing. She brushed her thumb over my knuckles again. And you really need to stop thinking you owe them something. If you look at it objectively, you've saved their pack leader's fiancé, taken out just as many rogue vampires as the group of them, brought back knowledge of one of their own after they exiled her. And I'm still acting like I'm the one on probation. I finished for her, because she was right and we both knew it. Her eyes held mine. Yes. I stared at the seat back for a beat, then looked back at her. It's not that I think I owe them. It's that. I exhaled, forcing honesty past stubborn pride. I feel a kinship. So I want to do everything I can for them. Blame it on my past, but I feel family should be treasured. You can only help them so much before it falls on them to want to learn, Edythe said softly. Lead a horse to water and all that. Save some of this wisdom to calm my aunt down, I muttered, and she smiled like she'd take that as a compliment. Chapter 166, Cruising Altitude PT2. Thomas POV. The cabin had gone quieter. Bella's breathing had evened out, slow and steady under the blanket. Edward still watched everything that moved, including the aisle and the flight attendants and the man 3 rows up who kept clearing his throat like it was a personal mission. Just as my mind began to settle again, Edythe spoke. Tell me more about Leah. Her tone was soft, too soft for it to be idle conversation. I blinked and turned my head slightly toward her. More. Edythe's eyes stayed on the dark window, her reflection faint in the glass. You said she's improving tremendously. I want to understand why. Is it discipline, or motivation? I huffed a quiet laugh. Both. Mostly stubbornness. And when she struggles, Edythe continued, what does it look like? I hesitated, searching for the right words. She gets sharp. Defensive. Like she's expecting the world to swing first and she refuses to be caught flat-footed. Edythe's thumb traced my knuckle once, slow. Does she take correction well? That's the weird part, I admitted. She does, when it's about control. When it's practical. But if it even smells like pity, or someone trying to tell her who she is, she bristles. She needs respect, Edythe murmured, as if stating a fact. Not reassurance. I glanced at her. You say that like you've met her. Edythe's eyes finally left the window. She looked at me, calm, unflinching. I have, she said simply. I blinked. You have. Edythe nodded once. Twice you don't know about, and one you know of. My brows pulled together. Okay, when? The first time was when you were gone, she said. I went to your rock, the one you sat on when you needed quiet while living at Charlie's. Leah was there. My stomach tightened. You didn't tell me. I didn't want to add to your training, she said, voice steady. Not when you couldn't do anything with the information from the other side of the world. That was irritatingly reasonable. And the second time. Edythe's gaze returned to the window, but her voice didn't waver. That was the one you know about. The time Jacob came to warn Bella and Edward about the treaty specifics. Leah didn't say anything out loud, but I still heard her. I held still. Heard what? Edythe paused, just long enough to choose the clean truth instead of the dramatic one. I heard her wish, no, her desperation, Edythe said softly, the word catching like it bothered her. That she could, or would, imprint on you. The words hit harder than they should have, like the plane had dipped. I stared at her. Desperation, she was that bad. Not said, so much as wished, Edythe replied evenly. She was in a very dark place in the pack mind and still torn up over Sam. She saw you as a way out of that. Someone she was genuinely coming to care about who could override all the hurt she had about Sam and Emily. My jaw tightened. And the third? Edythe's hand stayed in mine. I asked her to meet me. After you and I became engaged. I turned fully toward her. You asked Leah to meet you. Yes. Why? Edythe didn't smile. Didn't preen. She just answered. Because she deserved to hear it from me, woman to woman, she said quietly. And because I didn't want her turning her feelings into something sharp enough to cut you with later. My throat tightened. What did she say? Some of it is between her and me, Edythe said, gentle but final. But for my part. She drew a slow breath. I told her she didn't need to apologize for what she felt. I stayed very still, watching her. Edythe's voice didn't change, but it sharpened in a way only I would catch. And I told her I wouldn't be cruel about it, but I also won't pretend you're unclaimed. A beat. You and I are building a life, she continued softly. If Leah stays close to you, she stays close to us. I didn't know what to make of that last comment. It sounded like a boundary. It also sounded like room. I swallowed, eyes flicking from her face to our joined hands. Edythe, are you saying you're okay with Leah being close to me? I'm saying I won't punish her for existing near you, Edythe answered, precise. And I won't punish you for caring about someone who is hurting. That's not the same thing. No, she agreed softly. It isn't. The engine hum filled the space between us. Bella shifted in her sleep, sighed, and settled again. Edward's eyes flicked over, then away, like he was politely pretending not to hear anything while hearing everything. I kept my voice low. I don't want her to get the wrong idea. Leah doesn't live by ideas, Edythe said. She lives by what people do. And what am I doing? I asked, and I hated that there was edge in my voice. Edythe didn't react to the edge. She just answered. You're teaching her. You're giving her structure. You're treating her like she's capable instead of broken. Her thumb moved once over my knuckles. That's what she responds to. Not promises. I stared at the seat back. She's going to get hurt anyway. Edythe's eyes narrowed slightly. Because of imprinting. Because of imprinting, I confirmed. Because if it happens, it doesn't matter what she wants. Or what I want. Or what anyone thinks is fair. Edythe inhaled slowly, like she had to make space for her own anger before she could speak around it. Then don't make this about outcome, she said quietly. Make it about who she becomes while she's still free. I let out a humorless breath. That's a nice thought. It's a necessary one, she corrected, still gentle. Thomas, answer me one thing. I glanced back at her. Okay. When Leah looks at you during training, Edythe asked, voice soft enough it almost vanished under the engine noise, does she look like she's waiting to be judged, or like she's waiting to be seen? That question hit too cleanly. I looked out into the black sky, buying time. Seen, I admitted finally. And that's the problem. Edythe tilted her head. Because you don't want to be what she clings to. Because I don't want to be anybody's way out, I said. Not like that. Not when it isn't real choice. Edythe's expression softened. You're not her way out, she said. You're her proof that the world doesn't only take. My throat tightened. You make it sound noble. I make it sound true, she replied. I swallowed. Then the uglier thought slipped free, the one I'd been circling since she said package deal. And you? I asked quietly. You're not bothered that she wants that? Edythe didn't flinch. I'm not made of glass. That's not what I meant. I know. Her fingers laced more firmly with mine. And I'm not ignoring it. I'm choosing how I respond. I tried to breathe around the tension in my chest. How? By refusing to turn her pain into a battleground, she said. And by trusting you. I stared at her. Trusting me to do what? To stay who you are, she said softly. Steady. Honest. Not cruel. Something in my chest loosened enough that I could breathe. I leaned closer, forehead almost touching hers. You're terrifyingly reasonable. I've been told, she murmured. I gave a quiet huff of laughter, then sobered. And, you really don't feel threatened? Edythe's lips curved, small and controlled. Threatened? No. I frowned. Then what? Edythe cut in, still gentle. Thomas, I'm capable of noticing reality without panicking about it. What reality? She held my gaze for a beat long enough that I knew she wasn't going to dodge it. I think Leah is attractive, Edythe said simply. I blinked. You. Edythe's mouth twitched. Don't make that face. I'm not making a face. You are, she said, calm as ever. Leah is, striking. She's beautiful. A pause, then a dry little exhale. And yes. Hot. The bluntness of it did something bizarre to my brain, half shock, half laughter. I stared at her. You just said that. I have eyes, Edythe replied, matter of fact. And I have no interest in lying to you because honesty is inconvenient. My throat went tight. That's not the answer I expected. It's the honest one, she said. I let out a slow breath, trying to reset my thoughts. So you think she's hot, and you're still telling me to keep boundaries? Yes, Edythe said. Both can be true. And what about the part where she thinks you're giving her hope? I asked, voice rougher than I meant. Because package deal sounds like. It sounds like what it is, Edythe interrupted gently. A boundary. I waited. Edythe's thumb stroked once across the back of my hand. I did not promise her a place, she said quietly. I didn't offer her comfort. I offered her truth. My jaw tightened. What truth? That you are not property, Edythe said, steady as stone. And neither is she. If she chooses to fight for something, she does it honestly. If she chooses to let it go, she does it honestly. Her eyes held mine. And if she stays near you, she does it knowing I am not a woman who will punish her just to feel powerful. I swallowed. That's dangerously reasonable. Edythe's lips curved. Only when I need to be. I stared at her for a long moment, then asked, so what do I do? Keep teaching her, Edythe said. Keep your boundaries. Don't offer her anything you can't give. Her gaze sharpened a fraction. And don't shut her out just because her feelings are inconvenient. I exhaled slowly. That last part is going to be difficult. I know, she said, and there was no judgment in it. Just understanding. For a moment, the cabin felt like it belonged to the hum of the engines and the dark glass and the quiet certainty of her hand in mine. Then Edythe shifted, letting the tension ease by degrees. Her voice softened into something almost normal. And your aunt, she murmured. Do you think she'll throw something, or will it be verbal first? I snorted, grateful for the exit. Verbal. Renee likes to build momentum. Phil will try to intervene. Bella will look guilty. Edward will look guilty even though he doesn't feel guilt the way normal people do. Edythe's quiet laugh warmed the space between us. And you? I will stand my ground, I said, surprised by how steady it sounded. Like you told me. Edythe's eyes held mine. Good. Bella sighed again in her sleep. Edward's gaze flicked over, then away. The cabin lights dimmed another notch, like the plane itself was insisting on rest. Edythe leaned into my shoulder, cool and still, and I let my eyes close. Not to sleep, at least not yet. Just to hold on to the quiet while I had it. Because in a few hours, the sun would be climbing over Florida, Renee would be awake and armed with opinions, and I'd be walking into a living room where normal people problems waited for me like a trap. And somewhere back in Forks, a wolf with too much fire and nowhere safe to burn it would be training, fighting, and trying to survive being herself. Package deal. I didn't know what that meant yet. But Edythe's hand stayed in mine like an anchor, and for now, that was enough. Chapter 167, Jacksonville PT1. Thomas POV. The moment the plane doors opened, Florida hit me like someone had wrapped a warm, damp wool sweater around my face and whispered, "Welcome to the swamp." It wasn't even daylight yet, just that pre-sunrise gray that made the airport lights look harsh and unflattering, but the air already felt thick enough to chew. I could taste salt and jet fuel and humidity. The kind of humid that didn't just sit on your skin, it tried to move in and claim squatters' rights. Bella blinked like she'd forgotten what warm felt like. Edward didn't blink at all. Edythe's fingers threaded through mine as we followed the stream of passengers into the terminal, her step perfectly measured, her expression neutral in a way that only looked human if you didn't know her. She'd swapped her usual winter palette for something lighter, still modest, still careful, but it was strange seeing her dressed for a place where the sun had ambitions. Her sunglasses were already in her hand, ready. "You all right?" I murmured, mostly because the idea of her in Florida made some primal part of my brain want to throw a blanket over her like she was a baby bird. "I'm fine," she replied, soft and steady. "The cloud cover is holding." Outside the glass, the sky was bruised with low clouds. Not the Forks kind, those were layered and patient and endless. These looked like they'd been thrown up in a hurry, like the atmosphere couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain or explode. Bella's mouth twitched. "Mom's not going to be happy it's cloudy. She'll take it as a sign." "Of what?" I asked. "Of her being right about everything that comes from Forks," Bella said, like it was obvious. We rounded the corner toward baggage claim, and I spotted her instantly. Renee was hard to miss. She radiated energy like a small sun, ironic in a place I was actively trying not to be cooked by the actual one. She was in a bright tank top that didn't match the hour of the day, hair pulled up in a messy knot that looked effortless in the way only Renee could manage. She was bouncing on the balls of her feet like she'd been waiting for this moment for weeks. Phil stood beside her like a calm, steady tree planted next to a hurricane. Tall, broad-shouldered, easy smile. A man who looked like he'd learned, through years of experience, how to let Renee's emotions pass over him without getting uprooted. Bella took 3 steps and got tackled. "My baby!" Renee squealed, wrapping Bella in a hug that looked like it might crack ribs. "Oh my God, you're real! You're actually here. I was convinced you'd get abducted by forest cults." Or she froze mid-round, pulling back just enough to stare at Bella's face. "You're too pale. Are you eating? Do they feed you in Forks or is it like, only mushrooms and depression like when I was a kid there?" "Hi, Mom," Bella managed, half smothered, half laughing. Renee's gaze snapped to me, and for a split second she looked like she might cry. Then she didn't. Because she was Renee, and feelings were apparently illegal unless they could be weaponized into a lecture. "Thomas," she exclaimed, rushing forward and hugging me too, fast and fierce. "You're alive. You're taller. You look like you've been doing things. Are you sleeping? You look." She pulled back again, scanning me like a mother assessing a used car. "Fine. You look fine. But you're in trouble for not emailing me enough." "I did email you," I said automatically. "Not enough," she declared, as if quantity was the only metric that mattered. Phil stepped forward with an easy grin and offered me his hand. "Hey, kid. Good to see you." I shook it, grateful for the calm. "Good to see you too, Uncle Philosophy." Phil's brows jumped for half a second, then he chuckled like it hit him in a pleasant way. "Right. Yeah. Uncle Philosophy." He glanced at Renee, affectionate and amused. "Still getting used to that." Renee was already looking past me. Her eyes locked on Edythe. And I felt Edythe's posture change, just a little. Not fear. Not tension. More like, attention sharpening. A predator noticing a new variable. Renee took one step closer, smiling bright. "And you must be Edythe. Finally." "Hi." She thrust a hand out like she was greeting a celebrity. Edythe took it, her handshake gentle, perfectly human. "Hello, Renee. Thank you for having us." I smiled to myself. So that's why she'd been holding my hand so much. Edythe had been warming her skin for this moment. Renee blinked, recalibrating at the politeness. Then her gaze dropped to Edythe's left hand. To the ring. The world went very, very still. Renee's smile didn't fade so much as freeze into something brittle. Bella's entire body stiffened like she'd just heard thunder. Edward's eyes flicked toward the ring, then toward me, like he was watching a train approach the station and deciding whether to intervene or just let nature take its course. Was it my imagination, or was he holding his phone camera towards us? Phil sighed quietly, the sound of a man who had seen storms on the horizon and knew none of his umbrellas would survive. Renee lifted her head slowly and looked directly at me. "Thomas," she said, voice too calm. "Oh. Yes." I answered, because apparently I hated myself. Renee pointed at Edythe's hand without looking at it again. "What is that?" Edythe didn't flinch. Didn't hide it. Didn't pretend it wasn't there. She just stood, calm and unclaimed by fear, like she was letting Renee have her moment without surrendering a millimeter. I cleared my throat. "That," I said, "is an engagement ring." Renee stared at me as if I'd just told her I'd joined the circus. Then her voice rose. "You are 18. Almost 19, I corrected, immediately regretting that I had a mouth. Bella made a small choking sound. Renee's eyes flashed. "Almost doesn't count." "It does in most courts," I muttered before I could stop myself. Phil coughed, suspiciously like a laugh. Renee whipped her head toward him. "Philip." Phil lifted both hands. "Hey. I'm just here for moral support. Don't shoot the audience." "I'm not going to shoot anyone," Renee snapped, then immediately pointed at me again. "Why? Why are you doing this? Why are you?" She gestured wildly, like she was trying to physically push the concept away. "Making permanent decisions when your brain is still developing." Bella murmured, "Mom." Renee ignored her. "Did Charlie put you up to this? Is this his weird way of claiming you? Because that man has issues." "Renee," Phil said gently, warning. Renee barreled on. "Or is this because you're trying to be responsible? Because if this is about responsibility, I swear I will personally drag you to a urologist." "It's not Charlie," I said quickly, because if she brought Charlie into this, it would become a 3-day event. "And it's not panic. And it's not, whatever you're picturing." Renee's eyes narrowed. "Then what is it?" I inhaled. Edythe's hand slipped into mine and gave a squeeze, just once, an anchor, not a leash. I remembered what she'd told me on the plane, strike first and stand your ground. So I did. "It's love," I said, quiet but firm. "It's choice. It's not an accident. And it's not a shotgun wedding." Renee's mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again with different ammunition. "Oh my God," she breathed, eyes flicking between me and Edythe. "Are you pregnant?" Bella groaned into her hands, like she wanted to dissolve into the tile. "No," I said, heat rushing into my face. "No. Not, no. That is not, no." Edythe's lips curved, faintly, like she found Renee's predictable panic almost endearing. "No," she said simply. "I'm not." Renee blinked at her tone, so calm, so certain. It threw her off balance. "Good." I leaned into it. "We're getting married in 2 weeks, I said, before I could lose nerve. "Spring break. Small ceremony. Forks. We weren't planning to make it a whole thing." Renee made a strangled sound. 2 weeks. Phil rubbed a hand down his face, already tired. Bella peeked through her fingers. Mom. Renee rounded on Bella like she'd just noticed her again. You knew. Bella winced. Yes. And you didn't tell me. Bella's voice went flat. Because this is what happens when we tell you things. Renee's mouth dropped open, offended, then she snapped it shut, because she knew Bella was right and that made it worse. She turned back to me, eyes shining with something that looked dangerously like tears that had decided to cosplay as rage. Thomas, she said, lower now, like she was trying to keep control. I love you. I do. You know I do. But you are. She shook her head, hair coming loose from its knot. You're my kid too, in all the ways that matter. And you're doing something irreversible. I swallowed. Yes. And you're doing it with. She looked at Edythe again, really looked. With someone I barely know. Edythe didn't pretend otherwise. That's fair, she said, voice gentle. You don't know me yet. Renee blinked again, thrown off by the lack of defensiveness. Edythe continued, still calm, still honest. But Thomas does. Renee's gaze flicked back to me. And in that moment, the noise of the airport faded a little. The carts rolling, the announcements, the distant laughing, none of it mattered as much as the quiet war happening in Renee's eyes. Fear and love. Control and surrender. All battling for dominance. Phil stepped in beside Renee, placing a hand lightly at her back. Not restraining. Just steadying. Honey, he said softly. Let's take a breath. Okay. Renee exhaled, sharp. Then again, slower. Bella's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Edward watched, like he was cataloging human behavior for later analysis. Renee's eyes softened just a hair. You're really sure, she said, not as an accusation this time, but as a plea. I nodded once. I'm sure. And you're sure? Renee asked, turning to Edythe. Edythe met her gaze without blinking. Yes. Renee looked like she wanted to hate that answer. Instead, she turned her head away and pressed a hand to her forehead. Okay. Okay. She inhaled, then exhaled, then abruptly pointed at me again. But I reserve the right to be mad about it for at least an hour. That seems reasonable, I said, because I wasn't stupid. Bella muttered, that's a personal record. Renee shot her a look. Do not sass me, Isabella. I missed you for a year. I have a backlog. Phil cleared his throat. Bags. Bags, Renee echoed, as if remembering we were in an airport and not the center of her emotional universe. We collected luggage in a haze of Renee alternating between fuming silence and rapid-fire questions at Bella. How long have you known? Did Charlie know? Is Charlie going to have a heart attack? Is there a dress? Please don't tell me there's a dress. Do you have a venue? Don't tell me it's in the woods. It's going to be in the woods, isn't it? Bella didn't answer half of them. She just stared at the baggage carousel like it might save her. Edythe answered when it was appropriate, short, truthful, controlled. And I held my ground. It was strange. I'd expected to fold under Renee's intensity the way I always had when I was younger. Expected to backpedal, to soothe, to apologize for choices that weren't wrong. But Edythe's hand stayed in mine, steady as gravity. And every time Renee's voice climbed, Edythe's calm made it harder for me to panic. By the time we reached the parking garage, Renee's anger had shifted. Not gone. But, redirected. She climbed into the passenger seat of Phil's SUV, twisting around to look at us in the middle seat like she was conducting an interrogation. So, she said, suddenly bright, like a switch had flipped. Tell me everything. Bella made a low sound of dread from behind us in the back seat. Phil started the engine, eyeing the clouds. Let's get home first, he said. Coffee. Food. Then you can interrogate. Renee waved him off. I can multitask. Edythe leaned slightly closer to me, her voice barely audible. This is impressive. What is? I murmured. The speed at which she converts rage into planning, Edythe said, perfectly serious. I snorted quietly. That's Renee. Renee's head snapped around. I heard that. I smiled, despite myself. Of course you did. She narrowed her eyes, then softened again, just a little. I'm still mad, she warned, but the edge was fading. But I'm also happy you're happy. Bella blinked at her like she didn't trust it. Renee huffed. Don't look at me like that. I'm allowed to have multiple emotions. I'm a complex person. Phil murmured, that's one word for it. Renee ignored him and leaned forward between the seats, peering at Edythe again. You're very calm, she said, suspicious. Edythe offered a small, polite smile. I've had practice. With what? Renee demanded. With being around people who love intensely, Edythe answered, smooth as silk, and somehow it didn't sound like a dodge. It sounded like respect. Renee blinked, then laughed once, surprised. Okay. Fine. That was good. Phil shot Edythe a quick, appreciative glance in the rearview mirror, like he'd just seen someone successfully talk down a bomb. The car rolled out of the garage and into the Florida morning, the clouds still holding, the air thick, the road slick like it had rained recently. I leaned back, watching the palm trees blur past, and let myself breathe. Renee had exploded. Renee was still Renee. But she hadn't shattered anything. Not yet. Edythe's fingers squeezed mine once, quiet reassurance. And Bella, curled against Edward's side in the back seat, looked like she was trying very hard to believe that this might actually be okay. For now, the storm had passed. Which, in Renee's world, probably just meant she was gathering momentum for the next one. Chapter 168, Jacksonville PT2. Thomas POV. Renee's house always felt like her, bright, busy, and slightly overcommitted to the current fad. Even at 7 in the morning, there was music playing somewhere in the background and a large pot of the latest Oriental tea to catch Renee's fancy, next to a small pot of coffee for philosophy. Phil moved through the kitchen like a man who had learned how to support the chaos without becoming part of it, mug in hand, calm smile, no visible panic. Renee, on the other hand, had already switched from explosion mode to hostess mode so fast it made my neck hurt. You're going to eat, she announced, as if it were a legal requirement. All of you. I will not have anyone fainting dramatically on my watch. It's emotionally exhausting. She was already pulling plates out like she was setting up for a holiday dinner instead of an ambush breakfast. Eggs? Pancakes? We can do both, Renee declared. Fill up, tell them we can do both. Phil lifted his mug in surrender. We can do both. Edward's expression stayed perfectly polite. Thank you, Renee, but we've already eaten. Renee's eyes narrowed. At 4 in the morning. Something like that, Edward said smoothly. Renee looked to Edythe, clearly expecting a crack in the story. And you? Edythe's smile was mild. I'm fine. Renee's suspicion sharpened. Sweetheart, you look like you could float away if a strong breeze hit you. Bella's shoulders tensed at that, a tiny flinch she tried to hide by reaching for a glass of water. Edythe's voice stayed gentle, but there was a softness threaded through it that felt deliberate. Renee, she said, catching both Renee and Phil in her gaze. Edward and I don't need to eat the way you do. We're still healthy. We're still fine. Please don't worry about it. The air shifted, subtle as a pressure change before a storm. Renee blinked once, the fight in her face stuttering like a skipped heartbeat. Well, Renee said suddenly brisk, as if she'd just remembered an appointment, fine. Okay. If you're fine, you're fine. I'm not. She waved a hand like she was swatting away her own anxiety. I'm not going to police anyone's metabolism. Phil nodded along a beat too easily. Yet. They're fine. He took another sip of coffee, calm as ever, as if the question had never mattered. Bella's fingers tightened around her glass. Not enough to crack it, because she was human, but enough that I heard the faintest squeak of skin on glass. Her eyes flicked to Edythe for half a second, then away. Uncomfortable. Not angry. Just aware. Edythe didn't look smug. She didn't even look relieved. She just let the moment pass and turned it back into normal conversation like she was smoothing a wrinkle out of fabric. Thank you, she said softly. We appreciate you feeding everyone else, especially this glutton. She tipped her chin toward me. Renee snapped back into motion, the way she always did when her emotions got too close to the surface. Exactly. I will feed Bella and Thomas. That is my role. She jabbed a finger toward Bella. You eat. She turned to me, you eating is a given. Bella gave a small, resigned nod, then glanced at me with a look that said, necessary, even if it didn't feel good. Edward's mouth twitched, like he was trying not to smile, and Bella shot him a look that was half warning, half exhaustion. Edythe's fingers threaded through mine at my side, cool, steady, grounding, like she knew exactly what I was thinking. Because I did know. That hadn't been normal. Not for Renee. Not for Phil. It hadn't felt like Edythe had taken something away from them, exactly. More like she'd reached in and turned down the volume on the part of their brains that wanted to panic. Part of me was grateful. Part of me wasn't sure what to call it. Across the table, Renee had already pivoted back to Bella, chatter resuming at full speed like nothing strange had happened. Now, Renee said brightly, tell me everything. I want details. All the details. And if anyone says it's complicated, I will throw a pancake. Bella made a small noise of dread. Phil, now at the stove, chuckled and started flipping something in a pan like he'd been waiting his whole life for the chance to weaponize breakfast. After breakfast, after Bella and I had done our duty and Renee had accepted it as proof that her children were not wasting away in the cold north, Renee vanished down the hall with the intensity of someone on a mission. Bella, she called, bedroom. 2 minutes. I have a thing. Bella's shoulders tensed. Mom. No arguing, Renee cut in. This is a gift, and I will not be denied. I am a mother. I am terrifying. Move. Bella shot Edward one helpless look, see what I mean, and trudged down the hallway. Edythe's eyes flicked to mine with a hint of amusement. She's efficient. That's one word for it, I murmured. Phil took a sip of coffee and nodded like he agreed with Edythe's assessment. Renee runs on momentum. Fighting it just makes it worse. From down the hall came the sound of a closet door sliding open and Renee's voice rising with triumph. Aha! A minute later, Bella reappeared holding a folded blanket. Not store-bought. Handmade. It was a quilt made of old t-shirts, bright squares, faded logos, worn seams stitched into something sturdy. I recognized more than a few, the ridiculous tourist shirts Renee and Bella used to collect on our trips, like souvenirs were proof the world was still reachable. Bella's face had changed in the way it only did when something got past her defenses. You made this? She asked, quiet. Renee lifted her chin like she was daring anyone to call her sentimental. Trip shirts, she said, like it explained everything. They were taking up space and I refused to be haunted by clutter this year. So. Blanket. It's practical. Bella ran her fingers over one of the squares and swallowed. Thank you. Renee's expression softened for half a second, real mother, real love, before she snapped back into motion like softness embarrassed her. Okay, she said briskly. Now. Serious question. Bella froze again. Here it comes. Renee didn't even pretend not to be looking past Bella. Her eyes went straight to Edward, who stood by the doorway like a polite statue, giving them space while also being very clearly present. "How serious is this?" Renee asked, voice lowered but still sharp, "with him?" Bella's cheeks flushed. "Mom." "No," Renee said, cutting her off. "Listen. I'm not asking because I don't like him. I'm asking because you look at him like he's oxygen, and I need to know you understand what that means." The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. Even Phil stopped moving for a beat. Edward didn't speak. Didn't shift. But his eyes softened, barely, like the question hit somewhere tender. Bella's fingers tightened around the blanket. "It's serious," she said, quiet and certain. "It's real." Renee held her gaze. "Is it the kind of serious where you're still Bella when he walks out of the room?" she pressed. "Or is it still the kind where you stop existing when he's not there?" Bella's throat worked. "I'm still me." Renee exhaled hard like she'd been bracing for a different answer. "Good." Then, softer, almost to herself, "I just don't want you disappearing inside someone else. Not even someone good." Bella looked down at the quilt in her hands. "I'm not disappearing." For a moment, Renee just stared at her daughter, all the noise in her head quieting long enough to let love show. Then she flicked her gaze to Edward, narrowed her eyes, and pointed one finger like a warning sign. "And you," she said. "If you break her heart again, I will bury you in my backyard." Edward's voice came out mild and respectful. "Yes, ma'am." Renee blinked, thrown off by the calm agreement. Phil coughed into his mug like he was hiding a laugh. Bella groaned. "Mom." Renee waved a hand. "Play with your blanket." I turned my head slightly toward Edythe. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were attentive in that way she had when she was watching something important unfold. Not jealous. Not threatened. Just, measuring the shape of the love in the room. It hit me then, Renee's storms weren't about control. They were about fear of loss dressed up as loud opinions. Edythe's hand slid into mine under the edge of the counter, cool and steady. "Your aunt will relax soon," she murmured. I snorted softly. "That's a lie and we both know it." Her mouth curved. "It's optimism." Renee clapped her hands again like she was resetting the universe. "Okay. Plans? Since we're all here and I'm obviously the captain now." Phil leaned his hip against the counter and cleared his throat. "Actually, I'm stealing Thomas for a few hours." Renee blinked. "What?" Phil's smile turned just slightly smug. "AA practice. I'm short a pair of hands and your nephew looks like he can throw without dislocating something." Renee's eyes narrowed. "You are not using my nephew as free labor." Phil lifted one eyebrow. "It's character building." Renee opened her mouth to argue. Phil kept going, completely unbothered. "Besides, you'll have Bella and Edward, plus Edythe. You can do whatever it is you do when you get into planning mode." Renee's gaze flicked to Edythe, then back to Phil, then to me. Her tone went suspiciously sweet. "Fine. Go play baseball. But if you come back sunburned, I will personally sue Florida." "I'll survive," I said, already regretting every choice that put me outside in this humidity. Edythe's thumb brushed my knuckles once, quiet reassurance. "I'll keep him in the shade," Phil promised, deadpan. Renee snorted. "Good luck with that." Break. Phil's world was different from mine in a way that felt almost surreal. The field smelled like cut grass and dirt and sweat, the air buzzing with energy that had nothing to do with predators or treaties or immortal grudges. Players moved with purpose, laughing, cursing, shouting across the diamond. It was loud and human and alive. Phil wasn't the hurricane here. He was the anchor. He called out corrections without humiliating anyone. He joked without losing authority. He saw everything. At one point, he tossed me a ball and said, "Show me." I did. A clean throw, a little too hard, because I hadn't thrown anything for fun in a while. Phil whistled. "Okay. Forks has been feeding you something besides mushrooms." I laughed despite myself. "Don't encourage Renee with talk like that." Phil's grin softened. "Renee's scary," he said, and there was no complaint in it. "But she loves hard. That's why I love her." I watched him for a beat, watching the way the team responded to him. Then I asked the thing I'd been holding back since the airport. "How do you do it?" I said quietly. Whiplash." Phil's smile turned wry. "You don't fight the storm head-on," he said. "You steer around it. And when it passes, you make coffee. That's it." Phil shrugged. "It's enough." By the time we got back to Renee's house, the clouds had thickened into a steady grey blanket over the city. Renee was in the backyard room with everyone, talking a mile a minute about wedding logistics like she'd been planning this her whole life and was only now being informed. Bella looked exhausted. Edythe looked politely entertained. Renee saw me and pointed. "There you are. Tell me he didn't force you to run laps." Phil called from behind me, "Only the slow ones." Renee made an offended noise. "Philab." Phil kissed her cheek and headed to the kitchen like that ended the argument. Renee spun back toward me. "Okay. Timeline. Who is coming? What do I wear? Do I need a hat? I look good in hats." "Mom," Bella said, voice tight. "Breathe." Renee blinked like she'd forgotten that was optional. Then she laughed once, bright and real. "I'm breathing," she insisted. "I'm just excited." Edythe smiled, "Just be there, everything else will be taken care of." She looked at Edythe after she spoke, studying her like she was still trying to solve a puzzle. Then she surprised me. "You're good," Renee said to Edythe, blunt. "You don't get defensive." Edythe smiled, small and controlled. "There isn't anything to defend," she replied. "You love him." "So do I." Renee stared at her for a beat, then gave a single sharp nod like she'd just accepted a deal with terms she didn't like but couldn't argue with. "Fine," she said. "But if you hurt him, I will also bury you in my backyard." Edythe's voice stayed gentle. "Noted." Edward, from the edge of the patio, murmured, "There's a theme." Bella groaned. I laughed, and it felt normal. A couple of days later, we were back at the airport, moving through security and terminal crowds with the strange heaviness that came from leaving family behind, even the loud ones. Renee hugged Bella like she was trying to pack a year's worth of affection into 10 seconds. She hugged me almost as hard, even after I reminded her she would see me in less than 2 weeks. Then she hugged Edythe, which startled me, but Edythe accepted it with the same calm she gave everything else. "Be safe," Renee said, voice rougher than she'd allow herself to admit. "All of you." Phil shook my hand again, firm. "See you at the wedding." "Yes, sir." Phil's grin turned amused. "Don't call me sir. Makes me feel old." "Sorry, coach." Phil laughed. "That's worse." We boarded. We settled. We lifted off. And just like that, Florida started shrinking behind us. When we landed in Seattle, the air felt different the moment we stepped off the plane, cooler, cleaner, familiar in the way the Northwest now was for me. Like the world had edges again. We moved through the terminal toward baggage claim, and that was when I saw it. A newspaper box near one of the kiosks. The headline was big enough to catch the eye even in passing. "Seattle police seek leads in string of brutal killings." Under it, smaller text I didn't need to read to feel my stomach tighten. "Possible serial killer," I muttered without meaning to. Edythe's head turned, fast, too fast to be human, then she caught herself. Edward's gaze sharpened like a blade. Bella followed my eyes and frowned. What? I stared at the headline, the words suddenly heavy. It wasn't the normal kind of fear, the human kind, dark alleys and locked doors. It was the other kind. The kind that didn't leave fingerprints. The kind that came in threes and fours and dozens. The kind that didn't stop because the police asked nicely. I kept walking, but the headline stayed in my head like a splinter. Somewhere behind the clouds over Seattle, something was moving. And the worst part was that I couldn't tell yet if it was coincidence or the first ripple of a wave we were about to be slammed by. Chapter 169, The Border Game. Thomas POV. The drive between Seattle to Forks always felt longer on the way home, like the trees were leaning in to see what kind of trouble we'd brought back with us. Bella was quiet in the passenger seat, clutching her t-shirt blanket in her lap like it was both armor and proof that Florida had really happened. Edward drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly against Bella's knee, small contact, steady reassurance. Edythe sat beside me and he back seat, sunglasses on despite the clouds, posture relaxed in that practiced way that meant she was listening to everything. We stayed quiet, lost in our own thoughts as well pulled into Charlie's driveway. Charlie opened the front door before we'd even fully gotten out of the car. He looked Bella over from head to toe first, fast, automatic, then his gaze flicked to Edward, then to me, then to Edythe. His expression said I have questions, but the fact that Bella was standing there in one piece shoved the questions into a holding pattern. Hey, Dad, Bella said softly. Charlie exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since she left. Hey, Bells. I cleared my throat and gave him the quick version before Renee's existence could ambush him later. Renee and Phil are coming up for the wedding. Charlie froze. Bella winced. Edward's mouth twitched. Charlie's eyes narrowed at me as if I'd just handed him a live grenade. Renee is coming here. Yep, I said, because lying would only make the explosion bigger. A week from this coming Thursday. Charlie stared at the porch rail like it had personally betrayed him. Wonderful. Bella leaned in and kissed his cheek. It'll be fine. Charlie made a sound that meant nothing about this is fine, but he still stepped aside to let her in, one hand on her shoulder as if he needed the contact to confirm she was real. Edward didn't follow her inside. He paused at the threshold, polite as always. I'll see you later. Bella nodded, and for a moment her face softened in that way it always did around him, like the world shrank down to something she could manage. Then she was inside, and Charlie's door shut, and Forks swallowed the last bright scraps of Florida like they'd never existed. Edward turned back toward the car. His calm was too smooth. Too controlled. Edythe noticed it too. Her head tilted slightly, a fraction. Attention sharpening. Shall we head home? Edward said. Not a question. Break. The Cullen house was the same as ever, beautiful, quiet, and sitting in the forest like it belonged there more than any human structure had a right to. When we stepped inside, the warmth of it hit me first, then the scent, wood, clean air, faint traces of everyone who lived there, and the ever-present sugary smell. Carlyle was waiting. Esme stood beside him, hands folded, expression soft but strained. Jasper was still as a statue near the wall. Emmett half sat on the arm of a sofa like he'd been trying to pretend this was normal until it stopped being possible. Rosalie's eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. Alice was perched at the edge of the room, motionless in a way that didn't fit her. My stomach tightened. Carlyle's gaze went to Edward first. Is Bella home? Yes, Edward answered. With Charlie. Esme's relief was visible, just a brief loosening around the eyes. Then it was gone again, replaced by that same careful tension. Edythe slid her hand into mine. Cool. Steady. Anchoring. I didn't sit. I didn't pretend we were here for coffee. What happened? I asked. Alice's eyes lifted to mine, and the apology in them was already a warning. "Victoria came," she said. The words hit like cold water. Edward's jaw set. "Into our territory." I stared at him. "While we were gone?" Carlyle nodded once. "Yes." "And you didn't tell us," I said, because the sharpness in my voice couldn't be helped. "Not me. Not Edythe. Not Bella." Edward didn't answer right away. His calm was still too smooth, too controlled, but now I could see the strain underneath it, like he'd been holding something down with both hands and hoping it wouldn't slip. "There's more," he said quietly. The room tightened around that sentence. Jasper's attention sharpened. Emmett stilled. Esme's expression went careful in the way it did when she already hated what was coming. Carlyle's shoulders squared, subtle but present. Edythe's fingers laced more firmly with mine. "What more?" I asked. Edward met my eyes. I knew she was coming. My pulse spiked. "How?" Alice answered before he could. "I saw it." I snapped my gaze to her. "A vision." She nodded once. "It hit me last week in the lunchroom. Victoria was coming to test our defense around Forks and more specifically, around Bella." Edythe's voice was calm, but it carried an edge. "And you kept it from us?" Edward didn't deny it. "Yes." The word landed like a door shutting. I felt heat rise in my chest. "You made that choice for us." Edward's jaw flexed once. "I made it because the moment you knew, Alice lost the vision. But once I made the choice not to tell you, it came back and it was a very good chance to end Victoria for good." Silence, heavy and immediate. My stomach tightened. "What?" Alice's gaze didn't drop, but her voice softened. "You know I can't see you very well in my visions. I am working to compensate around that, but it's slow going. Even if it was just Edward and Bella that went to Jacksonville, the possibility to trap Victoria didn't come back. So we thought this was the best way." I held very still. Edythe's eyes narrowed. "So you kept him out of it?" Edward's gaze flicked to her. "Yes." "And you kept it from me," Edythe said, "and it wasn't a question." Edward didn't look away. "That was my decision." A beat. "Because you knew I wouldn't keep it from him," Edythe finished, voice level and cold. Edward's silence was answer enough. I swallowed hard. "So Jacksonville wasn't?" "It was real," Edward cut in immediately. "The tickets, Renee, all of that was real." His tone sharpened. "But my priority was also to keep Bella from being pulled into this before we had a clean chance to end it." Carlyle stepped in, voice steady. "Victoria did not know Bella was out of town." I stared at him. "Wait," I looked at Alice. "You saw her coming for Bella specifically?" Alice nodded. "That's why Edward engineered a way to get you all out of town to give us our shot at Victoria." Jasper spoke up. "Once you all were gone, we opened a hole in our defenses. Not big enough to give her a chance to do any harm or nothing, but enough that she couldn't pass it up." Jasper's stare went distant for a beat. "She came in far enough that we thought she'd committed." Alice's mouth tightened. "Close enough that I thought." She stopped, frustration flashing. "Close enough that it looked like a sure thing." "What changed?" I asked, even though my stomach already knew. Carlyle's expression went grim. "Right before we moved to close in, she hesitated." "Instinct," Jasper said. "Predators feel it when the air shifts." "And then she ran," I murmured. Rosalie's eyes flashed. "Straight for the border." Alice's voice tightened. "She hit the wolf line and ran it, back and forth. Using it like a shield. Close enough that we couldn't cross without provoking them." Edythe's hand tightened around mine, once. Not fear. Anger, held in a fist. "And the pack showed," I said. Jasper nodded. "Fast." Esme looked sad. We pointed out Victoria and told them we were trying to stop her, and some of the pack went after her. We mirrored them on our side trying to stop Victoria on one side or the other so she could be caught, but she danced across the border like she knew exactly where it was. Jasper continued, if the whole pack had gone after her they could have caught her, but with them holding back to make sure we didn't cross it gave her the room she needed to escape, especially after Emmett. Emmett's mouth twisted. I didn't touch their line. No, Jasper agreed, voice flat, but you moved like you were going to. And you laughed. Emmett spread his hands a fraction, unapologetic. Because she was playing hopscotch with a treaty and everyone else was acting like that was normal. Rosalie shot him a sharp look. It wasn't the time. It's never the time, Emmett muttered. Jasper's gaze stayed on me. The point is, Sam's people were already split. Half of them wanted to chase her down, the other half were locked on us, waiting for an excuse. When Emmett surged, even for a second, it gave them one. Esme's voice was soft, but heavy with guilt. They thought we were testing the boundary. We were, Rosalie said coldly. Just not in the way they assumed. Carlyle's expression tightened. They retreated to the safe response. Contain us. And Victoria used that hesitation like she'd planned the whole thing. I stared at the floorboards for a beat, forcing my breathing to stay even. So, she got away because everyone was busy watching everyone else. Yes, Carlyle said quietly. Alice's fingers were clenched on her knees. And the worst part is she learned. Her eyes flicked up, frustrated and sharp. Not about Bella being gone, she never knew that. But she learned where the line is, how fast the pack responds, and exactly how much it limits us. Edward's voice was controlled, but there was something tight underneath it. She confirmed the rules. And she'll use them again, I said, because it was the only conclusion that made sense. Alice nodded once. If she lives long enough to. Silence settled hard. Edythe's hand was still in mine, cool and steady, but the anger in her posture hadn't softened. She wasn't looking at Edward anymore. She was looking through him, like she was cataloguing the cost of his choice. I forced my eyes back to Edward. You decided for all of us. Edward didn't deny it. Yes. That honesty almost made it worse. Edythe's voice cut in, calm as glass. And you would do it again. Edward's gaze flicked to her. If it was the only way to create a window to kill her, yes. The room went colder. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed loud enough to count. Then I exhaled, slow, deliberate, and forced my shoulders to unclench. Okay, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. I don't like how it was handled. I don't like being kept in the dark, and I don't like Edythe being put in that position. Edward's expression didn't change, but the tension in his jaw did. I lifted a hand before anyone could jump in. But I can't sit here and assign blame. I looked at Carlyle first. You tried to end a threat without getting humans hurt. That matters. Then I looked at Alice. And you worked with what your gift would allow. That matters too. Alice's fingers eased slightly, like she'd been waiting for the accusation that didn't come. Edythe's hand stayed in mine, cool and steady, but I could still feel the anger in her posture, contained, not gone. So, I continued, let's stop circling the mistake and start dealing with what comes next. Because we all know what comes next. Jasper's gaze sharpened. The elders. I nodded. The elders. I flicked my eyes to Edward. And maybe Sam. But the elders will make it official. Carlyle's expression stayed calm, attentive. What do you think they'll say? I stared at the floorboards for a beat, laying it out in my head like a checklist. Then I looked up. They'll say 3 things, I said. First, that you intentionally drew a hostile vampire toward the boundary. Rosalie's mouth tightened. She didn't deny it. Second, that you endangered the treaty by forcing the pack to respond. I flicked my eyes to Emmett. Even if you didn't cross, they'll argue you pushed the situation until it looked like you might. Emmett gave a low, annoyed breath, but stayed quiet. And third, I finished, that you used the border like a weapon. Not against the pack, against Victoria. But they won't care about the distinction. Esm's face pinched with sadness. They'll say we were reckless. They'll say you were arrogant, I corrected gently. Because that's the story that keeps them in control. A beat. Edward's voice was quiet. And what do we say? I held his gaze. We tell the truth, I said. But we choose which truth matters. Edythe's fingers tightened around mine once, approval, not permission. I looked to Carlyle again. If they demand to know why you were near the border, the answer is simple, Victoria forced it. You tried to end it fast. You didn't cross. Carlyle nodded once. True. If they accuse you of trying to provoke the pack, I went on, you don't argue intent. You state outcome. No humans were exposed. No one crossed. Your people withdrew when ordered. That shows restraint. Jasper's jaw flexed, but he inclined his head slightly. Also true. I glanced at Emmett. And if they bring up the moment you surged, own it. Not as guilt. As discipline. We will not repeat that. Give them one concession they can swallow without getting any actual leverage. Emmett's mouth twisted. You want me to apologize? I want you to be useful, I said, tone even. There's a difference. Rosalie's eyes flicked to me, sharp, then softened by a fraction, like she understood the tactic even if she hated needing one. Alice's voice was quieter. And what about why you three were gone? The question landed. Edythe's posture tightened. Edward didn't move. I kept my voice level. That part doesn't belong to the elders, I said. They don't get to interrogate family decisions about travel. Bella visiting her mother is normal. My involvement in that is none of their business. Carlyle's gaze steadied. Agreed. Edythe's voice was calm, controlled. But they'll still try. I know, I said. So we don't give them a story they can use. I looked at Edward. Which means nobody says we engineered a window or we opened a hole in our defenses. Not to the elders. Edward's eyes sharpened. Then what do we say? We say Victoria came, I replied. You responded. She ran the line. The pack saw it. You withdrew. End of report. Jasper nodded once. Clean. Boring. Exactly, I said. Boring is survivable. Edythe's thumb brushed my knuckle once, the anger in her posture easing, just a notch. I looked at Carlyle again. Billy Black is an elder and if he is present, it may help. Not as permission, just as sanity in the room. Carlyle's expression stayed neutral, thoughtful. He may not be able to sway them. He doesn't have to sway them, I said. He just has to stop them from turning it into a performance. A beat. Edward's gaze held mine. And what about you? I shrugged slightly, careful. If they want a scapegoat, I can't control that. But I can control how I answer. I glanced at Edythe. And I won't go in defensive. I'll go in prepared. Carlyle exhaled quietly, like something had eased in him too. This is sensible. Don't spread it around, I muttered, and that earned the faintest shift of warmth in the room, barely a smile from Esm, the ghost of one from Emmett. Even Edward's tension loosened by a fraction. I looked back at him, keeping it simple. We're not done talking about your decision, I said. But we can talk about it later. Right now we handle the predictable problem. Edward nodded once. Understood. The room didn't feel warm exactly, but it stopped feeling like a freezer. And for the first time since Alice said Victoria's name, it felt like we had something solid under our feet again. Chapter 170, Aftershock. Thomas POV. The front door of the Cullen house shut behind us with a soft click, and the forest swallowed the sound. Edythe didn't speak as we walked to the car. She didn't need to. Her anger wasn't loud, it was controlled, compressed into posture and silence. Her face was calm in that way only she could manage, but her eyes were distant, her mind still inside that room, still replaying the conversation. I unlocked the doors to my truck, and she slid into the passenger seat with the kind of precision that meant she was holding herself together on purpose. When I started the engine, the radio came on low, static, then soft music, and she reached over and turned it off without looking. Message received. We drove. The tree edge blurred by in wet blacks and greys. The road shone under the headlights like it had been varnished. The forest leaned in close, tall and patient, as if it had already heard the story and was waiting to see what we did with it. Edythe stared out the window. Her hands were folded in her lap. Perfectly still. Sunglasses on despite the darkness. "You're still angry," I said finally, keeping my voice gentle. She didn't deny it. She didn't pretend. Yes. No elaboration. No softening. Just truth. I tightened my grip on the wheel for a moment, then forced it loose again. "At him," I clarified. "Or at me for not exploding." Her gaze stayed on the window. "I'm not angry at you." That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Because it meant she was carrying the rest alone. "I don't like it either," I said. "The choice. The lie. The way he decided what you were allowed to know." The muscles in her jaw shifted, tiny, almost imperceptible. "And?" she asked. "And I'm trying very hard not to turn this into a war inside our family," I said. "Because Victoria is still out there, and the elders are going to circle like sharks the moment they hear anything smells like weakness." Edythe's eyes flicked toward me for the first time since we left the house. Sharp, bright, and entirely too clear. "I know," she said. Of course she did. She knew everything. That was the problem. Her anger wasn't about drama. It was about principle. It was about the way Edward had used her devotion to me as a lever. And she hated being used. I pulled into our driveway, killed the engine, and sat for a beat in the hush that followed. Rain ticked lightly against the windshield. The house looked dark and quiet and safe in a way that almost made my chest ache. Edythe didn't move right away. Neither did I. Then I reached over and took her hand. Cold. Steady. Familiar. She let me. "I don't want you to carry that alone," I said. Edythe's gaze dropped to our hands. "I'm not alone." "No," I agreed. "But you're quiet." Her lips pressed together. "Because if I speak too soon, I'll say something I can't take back." That was honesty. That was restraint. That was Edythe. I lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles one by one, slow, deliberate, not playful. A promise more than a tease. Her breath changed. Just slightly. "You're trying to distract me," she said, and there was no accusation in it. Just recognition. "I'm trying to bring you home," I corrected. Edythe's eyes rose to mine, and for a moment the anger in her expression softened into something else, something older. Something hungry in a way that had nothing to do with blood. "You do that," she murmured, "by kissing my hand." "It's a start," I said. "I'm not reckless." One corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. But it was the beginning of one. "Stay there," I got out, walked around, opened her door. She stared at me like I'd done something unnecessary. "I can open my own door," she said. "I know," I replied. "Let me anyway." A beat. Then she stepped out, and I didn't let go of her hand. We walked inside together. The warmth hit us first. The quiet second. Our house didn't have the polished stillness of the Cullens' home, it had the lived-in kind. It smelled like wood and laundry and the faint trace of whatever Edythe had been reading last time she sat on the couch and the ghost of actual meals cooked in the kitchen. Edythe took off her sunglasses and set them on the entry table with careful precision, like she was choosing control in small things because she didn't have it in the big ones. I moved behind her. Not touching yet, just close enough that she could feel me. "Edythe," I said softly. She didn't turn around. "Thomas." I rested my hands lightly at her waist. The contact was gentle, an option, not a demand. I waited, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Her shoulders lowered by a fraction, like she'd been braced for impact and finally allowed herself to stop. "I hate that he did that," she said quietly. The words were controlled, but the feeling behind them wasn't. "Not because it was you. Because it was me." He made a decision about my honesty. I leaned in, my mouth near her ear. "He was afraid you'd choose me." Her breath hitched. "I always choose you," she said, simple and fierce. "I know," I murmured. "And I love you for it." I kissed the place just below her ear, slow, warm, deliberate. She went very still. Not tense. Listening. "Thomas," she warned, but her voice had changed. Less sharp. Less cold. I kissed her again, a little lower, and felt the way her body responded despite her anger, how desire didn't care about principle, how it didn't ask permission from the mind. "I'm not trying to erase what happened," I said against her skin. "I'm trying to make sure it doesn't stay lodged in you like a blade." Edythe turned in my arms then, finally, and her eyes were bright with too much restraint. "Are you trying to calm me?" she asked softly, "or claim me?" "Yes," I said honestly. That did it. Her mouth met mine, controlled for half a second, and then not controlled at all. She kissed like she always did when she stopped pretending she was unshakable, like she was choosing to be human with me, messy and intense and real. It helped that she didn't have to control her strength with me any longer. I backed her gently toward the wall, careful not to crowd, careful not to rush. She followed willingly, cold hands sliding up my chest, fingers curling into fabric as if she needed something to hold onto. When we broke apart, her forehead rested against mine. "Tell me you're still sure," she whispered. "I'm still sure," I said. "About you. About us. About the wedding." Her eyes flicked down, then back up. "And about boundaries." "Yes," I said again, steady. "We're not changing what we promised ourselves." A pause. Her mouth curved, finally, an actual smile, small and sharp and gorgeous. "Good," she murmured. "Because if you wanted all of me, I wouldn't hesitate. And then I would probably regret it in the morning." I let out a quiet breath that could have been a laugh. "I know." I kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, letting the tension unravel by degrees rather than snapping it. Her hand slid under my shirt. A chill spread across my skin where she touched, and for a moment the whole world narrowed to breath and heartbeat and the simple truth that she was here, with me, in our house, safe for a handful of hours. When she pulled back, her eyes were calmer, still angry at the choice Edward made, but no longer trapped inside it. "Upstairs," she said softly. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. I nodded once. Upstairs. We moved together, step by step, shedding the day as we went, shoes left near the door, the weight of other people's decisions loosening with every quiet footfall. At the top of the stairs, Edythe caught my hand and tugged me into the bedroom like she'd decided she was done being controlled by anyone's choices but our own. Fade to black. Or if you prefer, R18 follows. Not even bothering to close the door, I pulled her into an embrace from behind, my arms encircling her. I used my chin to move more of her hair off the side of her neck so I could continue to plant kisses starting just under her earlobe and down to her collarbone. Her whole body shivered, and she arched her back, grinding both her neck into my lips and her ass into my slowly hardening crotch. Slowly I slid my hands under her shirt from behind and started to run my hands along her sides. One great perk of dating a vampire: no bras needed. Gravity wasn't doing shit to these perfect C-size breasts. When we first started to explore each other's bodies, we were at Charlie's house. But now that we had a place of our own, Edythe was much more vocal with her appreciation of my administrations. Cupping her breasts, one in each hand, I felt her nipples begin to harden. I completed that by pinch both nipples between my thumb and index finger and gently pulling. The moan this action produced was music to my ears. Nothing better than knowing your partner loves what you are doing to her. I had to pause my kissing on her shoulder as she reached to pull her shirt off. When I looked up, I noticed we had stopped in front of the large dresser mirror. I met Edythe's eyes in the mirror and added just a bit more pressure to the nipples I still held between my fingers. The expression on her face, the sheer enjoyment in her eyes drove me wild. I pulled her into me harder as I caressed her breasts and returned to kissing her neck. Her response to this was to grind her ass into my crotch even harder, ensuring I was fully stiff and enjoying the sensations just as much as she was. Time was uncountable as we were lost in each other, but eventually Edythe turned in my embrace and kissed me hard enough to bruise my lips. My hands slid to her ass cheeks, and I started to knead them as I saw fit. My shirt came off next, and sooner than I expected, Edythe started to work at my pants button. Once she was done with the zipper, she quickly had me in hand. Trailing kisses down my chest, she quickly fell to her knees. Holding my throbbing dick in her hand, she started to lick the head and shaft she could reach. Then with practiced ease, she placed the tip in her mouth, moved her hand and started to slide my full length in and out of her mouth. Breathing in air through her nose just so she could hum when my length entered her throat. Placing my hands at the back of her head, I didn't bother controlling her actions as there was nothing I could ask her to do better. Knowing how much I liked her to show appreciation for my work, I returned the favor. My every encouraging word was followed by grunts and moans of pleasure. I offered her my warnings when I was close to coming, but she just picked up speed and tried to shove my shaft farther down her throat as her left hand started to fondle my balls. In no time at all I was grunting my release, and she was moaning her own pleasure. When she finally finished cleaning all the liquid off my dick, I stepped out of my pants that were gathered on the floor and picked her up and placed her on the bed looking up into my eyes. It was amusing to see her pant as I knew she didn't need to breathe, but some human habits never leave you, I guess. I kissed her lips and then continued kissing her slowly and as sensually as I possibly could as I made my way down her chest, paying special attention to her breasts and specifically her nipples. I knew she loved when I took her nipples into my mouth and released them with excess saliva on them and gently blew. The temperature sensations drove her nuts and always made me smile. I had her pants unbuttoned and was slowly lowering them inch by inch as I moved lower. Though her skin was tougher than a human's skin, it still gave to my pressure, and my higher temperature than normal made my touch sweet torture to my cold-skinned love. When my face arrived at her pussy, I gave a slow slopey kiss to her clit and then continued kissing down her right leg. I softly sunk my teeth into the muscle group at the inner thigh and kissed my way behind her knee. By the time I reached her calf, her pants and panties had fallen to the floor. However, I did not speed up but kept the same speed as I kissed all the way to the sole of her right foot. Then I reached for her left leg and began kissing her where I left off with her right one. I loved every moan of pleasure, every complaint to move faster, and seeing her back arch off the bed when I hit a particularly sensitive spot. In time I was again back at my prized spot. Her own juices were dripping and making her pussy lips gleam in the light. Deciding I wanted to try something I hadn't done before, I stuck my tongue out as long as I could and stiffening it, I shoved it between the folds with no warning. Even with my enhanced strength I was unable to keep her waist pinned to the bed, and if we had neighbors within a mile, I was sure they would have been giving us some knowing looks the next time we saw them. I hadn't planned it, but my nose happened to rub her clit as she bucked, and that caused her to buck even more. Her hands were entangled in my hair as she moaned incoherently. I continued my ministrations and was rewarded with her continued screams. Finally, when she relaxed like her bones were made of butter and she had no more strength in her squeezing thighs, I kissed my way back up to her lips. As I lay on my back with her head on my chest, I looked back on the day and then looked forward to the wedding that was quickly approaching. As Edythe lay, lost in her own thoughts, she reached for my penis and ran her fingers along it until it was at full attention, and I was shivering in pleasure. She turned her head to look up at me. While we were at Renee's, I read a book that gave me an idea. Or maybe advice would be the right word. She slung her right leg over my hip and sat on my legs, my penis, fully erect, just inches forward of where she sat. She leaned forward and the head of my penis poked into her belly as she smiled at me and inched her waist closed to the shaft. I can already feel the heat of your dick near my clit. It feels so wonderful. She slid closer, her pussy held open by her thighs being separated because of the way she sat, just barely douching my shaft. With a hum of pleasure she moved forward just a bit more, enough to point the business end of my penis straight at me, but I was lost in the pleasure of her pussy lips gripping the shaft of my dick. She slowly moved forward again. It felt like she was gripping halfway down or up my shaft, a distinction I was definitely not contemplating at the moment. When she stopped and settled more of her weight on my penis and started rubbing her hips just slightly forward and back in a slow rocking motion, I let out a long low groan. Holy shit! If she pushed for us to go all the way, I don't know if I could stop her this time. She had lost herself in the rocking motions, one moment going back and forth, the next moving her hips in a circular motion. I reached for her tits and focused my attention on them, trying to push back the building explosion in my midsection. Edythe seemed to approve of my activities as she started to rub faster with her waist. I could feel it getting slicker as she moved, and she started panting again as she let out high-pitched moans of pleasure when she reached the end of one direction and started the next. It seemed like a long time, yet not enough when I was unable to hold back my climax any longer. My hands left her breasts and clamped onto her hips, right at the leg joints, and I added my strength to her movement, crushing her to me as I started to pulse. She too screamed out in release at the same time as I did before she fell onto my chest once more. Spent and panting. It took a long time to recover my thoughts, and when I did, I reached behind me, grabbing a pillow and took its case off. Using that, I cleaned both of us up as best I could, then tossed it in the corner. Moments later I was asleep as I cradled Edythe in my arms. Chapter 171, The Message. Thomas POV. Forks High looked the same as it always did, grey concrete, wet pavement, students moving like they couldn't wait for the upcoming spring break. But the moment we pulled into the parking lot, I could tell something was wrong. Edward's Volvo was already there, parked near the main entrance like it belonged on a brochure. Bella climbing out of the passenger side, shoulders tight. Like she was worried about something. And then I saw why. Jacob Black stood at the base of the front steps beside his motorcycle, positioned like he'd chosen the spot for maximum visibility. He wasn't blocking the doors, just existing in front of them with that quiet, immovable confidence that made people reroute without knowing why. It worked. Heads turned. A few kids slowed down, pretending they weren't slowing down. Someone muttered Jacob's name like it was the opening line of a rumor. Jacob didn't care. His attention was locked on Edward. Bella hovered close to Edward's shoulder, face pale. Edward stood half a step in front of her, polite posture, predatory stillness underneath. Edythe and I quickly made our way to the small crowd forming and began to listen to the conversation. Jacob's voice was low, but the tension in it carried. You think because you took her out of town, you're in charge? Jacob snapped. You think you get to decide what happens to her like she's luggage? Edward's expression didn't change. That was almost the worst part. Jacob, Edward said calmly, leave. Jacob's laugh was short and sharp. Or what? You'll glare me to death. Bella's voice cut in, strained. Jake, stop. Please. Jacob didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Edward like he couldn't afford to blink. This isn't the place, Edward said. Jacob's mouth curled. Funny. Because your people made the border a place. Edythe's hand slid into mine automatically as we crossed the lot. Cool. Steady. Tighter than usual. Jacob saw us and his gaze snapped to me, fast, assessing, and the anger in his face eased, just a notch. Thomas, he said, and the tone wasn't hostile. It was warning. Familiar. Back in one piece. Barely, I muttered. It was touch and go last night. I am lucky to be walking. Edythe gasped and smacked me in the back of the head. Watch what you say. Jacob's mouth twitched, almost a grin, then his eyes cut right back to Edward. Edward's gaze didn't leave Jacob. I've already heard the warning from the pack. Jacob's expression sharpened. Yet. Edward's voice stayed even. Stay away from Bella. Stay away from us. Treaty. Jacob leaned forward half an inch. I heard you could do that. Edward didn't react. Do what? That mine thing, Jacob said, and there was heat in it now, real, personal anger. The head peeking. Edward's eyes narrowed. It's unavoidable. Jacob's smile turned sharp and a little ugly after he seemed to think for a second. How about you look again? For a split second, nothing happened. Then Edward went stiff, not tense, not defensive, frozen in a way that didn't match his usual control. Bella didn't notice why. The watching students didn't notice anything at all. To them it looked like two guys doing the silent, macho stare-down thing. But I felt it anyway, the way the air changed. Edythe felt it too, her fingers tightened around mine again, her head angling just slightly like she was trying to hear what wasn't being said out loud. Bella frowned, confused. Edward. Jacob didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on Edward, voice low and viciously satisfied. There, he said softly. Now we're even. Bella's cheeks flushed, anger and embarrassment tangled together. Jake. Don't, Jacob cut in, and this time he did look at her for a heartbeat, and the softness in his eyes made the next part hurt worse. I'm not here to fight you, Bells. I'm here because you're standing too close to something that doesn't learn. Edward's voice dropped, controlled and dangerous. Leave. Jacob's attention snapped back to him. Or you'll what? Step over a line again. That was the spark. Edward shifted, one step, not a lunge, but it was enough. Bella's breath caught. Edythe's posture went razor straight. Jacob's hands lifted a fraction, ready, not attacking, like he'd been waiting for Edward to prove something. A sharp voice cut through it. Hey! You, by the bike. A teacher, clipboard, raincoat, permanent suspicion, strode down the steps like irritation could substitute for authority. You can't be here, he snapped at Jacob. This is school property. Either you're a student or you move along. Jacob stared at him for a beat like he was deciding whether the man was worth acknowledging. Yeah, Jacob said flatly. I'm leaving. The teacher jabbed his clipboard toward the doors anyway. The rest of you, inside. Now. Break it up before I call the office. Jacob swung one leg over the motorcycle in one smooth motion, rain slicking his hair down against his forehead. Before he started it, his gaze cut to me again, toned back to something almost normal. Elders want you tonight, he said. Official. My stomach tightened. And, Thomas. His eyes flicked toward Edward without turning his head. Come ready. They're already mad about the border. Then he added, quiet, for Edward alone, tell your mind reader to stay out of my head. Edward's voice was ice calm. Control your thoughts. Jacob's grin flashed. No. The engine barked to life. He peeled out, tires spraying water, and vanished down the road like the forest had opened its mouth and swallowed him. Bella stood frozen, face tight, eyes bright with something she didn't want anyone to see. Edward exhaled once, slow, still stiff, still too controlled. Edythe's hand stayed in mine like an anchor as we entered the school. Edythe and I slid into our usual seats. One of the perks of our new schedule was that we were basically attached at the hip all day. The teacher droned on about something that required a textbook and more faith than I had to spare. Pens scratched. Pages turned. The room tried to be normal. It didn't work for me. I could still see Jacob beside that bike. Edward going rigid for half a second. Bella's face when she realized she was watching two worlds collide in front of strangers who thought it was just teen drama. Edythe didn't open her book right away. Her gaze stayed forward, expression calm enough to pass as bored. But her voice, when it came, was barely more than breath. Thomas. I didn't look at her immediately, just shifted slightly, like I was adjusting in my chair. Yet. Edythe's eyes stayed on the front of the room. Jacob didn't just think loudly. He aimed it. My stomach tightened. A memory. Her jaw moved, small, controlled. Bella. When Edward left her. The words landed like a cold weight in my chest. Edythe continued, still looking forward, tone precise. I didn't understand how bad it was, how wrecked she really was, until Jacob shoved it into Edward's mind to hurt him. I went very still, hands flat on the desk. So that's why Edward. Yes, Edythe said softly. He didn't just hear Jacob gloating. He saw it. Felt it. The whole thing. A brief pause. Jacob wanted it to cut. I swallowed, eyes on the board without seeing it. Did it? Edythe's answer was immediate. Yes. A beat. And Jacob? I asked, quieter. Satisfied, she said, and there was no admiration in it. Only blunt recognition. For the moment. I exhaled slowly, careful not to make it look like anything but impatience with a boring lecture. Somewhere behind us a student whispered and got shushed. The teacher kept talking, oblivious. Edythe's fingers brushed mine beneath the edge of the desk, cool, steady, grounding. Tonight, she murmured. I nodded once, barely emotion. Tonight. The elders. By the time last period ended, the rumor mill was already chewing on the morning like it was a fresh carcass. I caught snippets in the corridor, Jacob Black, Bella Swan, Edward Cullen, motorcycle, fight, all said with the kind of excited certainty that only comes from not knowing anything real. Edythe's hand found mine as we walked out into the drizzle. You're thinking too loudly, I can almost hear you, she murmured. I'm thinking appropriately, I muttered back. Her mouth twitched. That's not a denial. Outside, Edward's Volvo was gone. He probably wanted to get Bella away from the rumors as quickly as he could. I opened my truck door and waited for Edythe to climb in, then shut it gently like the world wasn't already trying to break everything. We sat for a beat with the engine idling. I finally spoke my thoughts to Edythe. After our talks over the weekend, I don't know how calm this meeting tonight will be. I can't keep acting like I'm subservient to the tribe or the pack. I went there to help, yes, but now they're comfortable calling on me like I'm answerable to them for some reason. I exhaled slowly, staring through the windshield at the wet, empty lot. I think I'm going to have to pull them up short. A beat. And they probably won't like it much. Edythe's face had a troubled look as she considered my words. Just don't push it so far that it's a fight, love. This has the potential to turn into a full-on war. You are part of our family now and vampires don't take loss well. I reached over and covered her hand where it rested near the console, thumb stroking once, slow, grounding. I'm not looking for a fight, I said. I'm looking to draw a line. Her eyes sharpened. They will try to make you responsible for us Cullens. I know. My jaw tightened, then I forced it loose again. And I'm not going to insult them, either. I'm going to remind them of facts they don't like. Like the fact that Victoria is the threat. Like the fact that no one crossed the line. Like the fact that half of them chose to watch the Cullens instead of chasing a known killer. I put the truck in gear and started to leave the parking lot. I'll take you to your parents' house before I go. That got her attention. Her head turned, eyes narrowing slightly. You don't need to drop me off like I'm. I know, I cut in gently. But I also know you will climb the walls at home alone if I leave you there. Happy middle ground is for you to be with your family. I am sure Alice and Esme have more wedding planning for you. For a second, the troubled look shifted, less worry, more something like reluctant approval. You're thinking like a husband, she said, quiet. I'm practicing, I replied. That earned the faintest pull at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. But not nothing. After the short drive with both of us lost in our thoughts, I pulled up to the Cullen house. Edythe didn't reach for the door right away. Thomas, she said softly. Yet. If it turns, she began, and stopped like she didn't want to hand the universe a script. If they push you into a corner. I leave, I finished, firm. I won't swing. I won't escalate. I'll walk out. Her eyes searched mine, looking for cracks. You'll actually do that, she said. Yes. I squeezed her hand once. Because you're right. Vampires don't take loss well. And the wolves don't back down when they feel threatened. I'm not going to be the spark. Edythe's shoulders eased by a fraction. Good. I leaned over and kissed her lips, brief, steady, no heat. Stay here. Be safe. Don't let your imagination run away with you. And try to rein in Alice a little, there is no need to try and train birds to be our ring bearers. Her mouth twitched again. She heard that and is calling you bossy. I snorted softly. Tell her I said the birds can RSVP like everyone else. Edythe's eyes warmed, just a flicker. She heard that too. Of course she did, I muttered. For a second, we just sat there with the rain ticking against the windshield and the Cullen house looming ahead like a held breath. Then I brushed my thumb over the corner of her mouth, a quiet habit now, and let my hand fall. Go inside, I said. Get out of your head before it turns into a battlefield. Her gaze held mine. And you? I'll do what I promised, I said. Calm. Clean. I leave if it turns. Edythe nodded once, approval, not permission, then opened the door and stepped into the damp air. She paused long enough to lean back in and press her forehead briefly to mine. Come back, she murmured. I will, I said. She shut the door gently and walked up the steps. I waited until she disappeared inside before I turned the truck around and headed back toward town. Chapter 172, Wedding Planning. Edythe POV. The house welcomed me the way it always did, with warmth, quiet, and the familiar stillness of my family settled into the wood and walls like it belonged there. The one place we didn't have to hide who and what we were. I stepped inside and paused, not because I needed to orient myself, but because I needed the first second to be mine. I already knew Alice had been listening earlier. I'd heard her, clear as day, call Thomas